What you're about to hear is the scariest thing I'd ever experienced. My sister and her husband were going away to Hawaii for a week. So since I'm the second oldest, she asked me to watch my 2-year-old nephew Sean for the duration. 2 was a tricky age for me because Sean was still in diapers at the time, and changing diapers was the last thing I'd ever want to be doing. Still, family is family, and I had to return a favor to them anyway. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom upstairs for the duration, and by the 3rd day I had everything down to a rhythm. Wake up, feed him, do my work in the living room while supervising him as he played, feeding him again, then putting him to bed. My sister has a high-tech baby monitor that connects to a touchscreen tablet. It records sound and video from above Sean's crib and feeds it to the tablet. I would keep that by my side while he slept, no matter where I was, the living room, the bedroom, anywhere. Midday most of the time he'd get sleepy and I'd bring him to his crib to take a nap. By like the 4th day, Sean was taking a nap, so I was in the backyard sitting at my sister's outdoor bar on my laptop. I had the baby monitor placed on the bar, so I was able to easily hear Sean start to laugh at something. I checked the tablet, and I saw him standing in his crib, so I guessed it was time to take him out. I went up to his room and grabbed him to bring him outside in the yard with me, where he drove around in his little electric toy car. For basically the rest of the day, I just watched Sean play with his toys while I would either be doing work on my laptop or just watching something on TV. Shortly after dinner time, I changed him one last time and put him into his crib. An hour or so passed, and there really wasn't much else for me to do. I wasn't interested in anything playing on TV, so I went upstairs to the guest bedroom to put an end to the night. Laying in bed in the dark, the room suddenly lit up from the tablet on the bedside table. I heard Sean laughing again. The tablet would light up if any significant amount of motion or sound was detected. I was comfortable in my position. I didn't really want to move. But when the screen suddenly went dark, yet I could still hear Sean's laughs, I got confused. I picked up the tablet, and all I saw was black. Yet, in a way, it seemed as though the screen was still on. I heard Sean say the word "yeah" as he continued laughing. Something wasn't right. I set the tablet down and began walking to Sean's room, calling his name as I was on my way. I got to his room, and he was standing in his crib. I asked him why he was awake and who he was talking to. He then tried reaching for something atop the crib, but his short arms couldn't reach it. It seemed he was going for the camera for the baby monitor. So I pointed at it and said, "Camera?" And he replied, "Yeah." I picked him up to give him a little lift to see what he was trying to do with the camera. And as I lifted him, he used his little thumb to cover the camera lens. My heart sank as I put the pieces together. The reason the tablet went dark was because it was being covered by someone, but I knew it wasn't Sean based on the fact that he couldn't reach it. "Sean, is someone in here?" I asked him, and in response he pointed to the closet. I picked him up and ran outside to the neighbor's house, pounding on the door screaming for help. An elderly woman answered, and she let me call the police with her phone. She was already clearly close with Sean, and because of that she seemed a lot more comforting. Police showed up and said when they checked the upstairs closet it was open, but no one was inside. The fact that it was open alone says everything. Someone was in Sean's closet that night. They must have made an escape when I took Sean and ran. The officers told me to stay at someone else's place for the night, and the elderly woman next door allowed us to sleep there. The next few nights after that, I watched Sean at my apartment. My sister and her husband cut the trip short, of course, after hearing the news. I was a 10-year-old diabetic who lived on the second-story floor. My parents lived on the first floor. That night, my dad was watching a scary movie about aliens. The aliens took over the world and were controlling people with their minds. I was unable to sleep in the room that I shared with my sister that night, so instead I slept on the first-story floor with my parents. At that time, my parents were using a baby monitor to make sure I didn't need any help in the middle of the night to take care of my diabetes. Late that night, as my parents and I fell asleep, I heard my mother's voice over the baby monitor. She said, "Amanda, honey, come give me a kiss, I'm going to work." In a confused daze, I looked outside to see it was pitch black. That's weird, I go to myself. Isn't it too late for my mom to be going to work? I rub the sleep out of my eyes as I make my way upstairs. The door to my sister's room cracks open, but my mom isn't in there. My sister is sound asleep on her bed, and the curtain just drifts open. I look around for my mom, but still can't find her. I make my way fast down the stairs and back into my parents' room, where my mom sat up and went, "What are you doing up?" I said, "Didn't you just ask me to come upstairs to give you a kiss goodbye?" She looks at me funny. "No, why would I say that?" she said. I looked at the baby monitor and said, "You didn't hear that?" She looked at me funny and says, "Go back to sleep." I lay on the floor shaking, thinking about what just happened. In my teens and early 20s, I would babysit as my side hustle. I was always really good with toddlers and babies, and usually the parents of the really young ones would pay more. There was this one pair of kids named Lucas and Adriana. Lucas was 2 and Adriana was 7, though Adriana doesn't have much to do with this story, I'll just say that right now. Lucas didn't really speak much, though I was told he had only just turned 2 a few weeks ago at the time. After a long and stressful day of watching the kids, they went to sleep. I would be spending the night at this couple's house watching their kids while they were out in some beach town with friends or something. When the kids finally went to sleep, I had some peace and quiet and time to unwind, as watching the 2 of them was a lot. I lay in the living room watching a movie. The couple actually still had a baby monitor for Lucas's room, and they asked me to keep that in earshot when he went to sleep. I left it on the coffee table in the living room. Eventually, I ended up on a FaceTime call with my friend, and that ate away so much time that by the end of it, it was past 12. I went to sleep after that. Actually, I fell asleep pretty easily. The next thing I remember was the dream. The freaky, disturbing, messed up dream. Everyone knows dreams can be weird and grainy, so I can't describe verbatim what happened in this dream. But the best I can remember, I somehow had lost the baby monitor and Lucas was missing. After searching through this weird dream version of the couple's house, I found the baby monitor under the bed, and on the screen was Lucas's dead body. And upon seeing that, a deep voice kept saying, "This was your fault." I must have heard it like 3 times before I suddenly woke up. After realizing it was just a dream, I remembered the baby monitor. I left it on the coffee table downstairs, but before going down to get it, I figured I'd check Lucas's room first since it was closer anyway, and I saw he was fast asleep. After that, I went downstairs to get the device and went back up to the room I was staying in. I went back to sleep, but once again, I woke up sometime later. But this time, I woke up to the little monitor device beeping and the red light flashing. I picked it up, and on the screen was Lucas standing up looking directly into the camera. Not smiling or laughing, just looking dead set into the camera, his eyes glowing in the night vision. The way he was looking freaked me out. It was a cause for concern, so I rushed over to his room. But when I got to his room, he was fast asleep, laying on his back. I said his name a few times and lightly shook him, but he didn't wake up. I looked around the room, scared, feeling like there was another presence in there with us. I checked the closet and looked under the crib. No one. I went back to the other bedroom and looked at the monitor again, and it showed Lucas laying flat in his crib. I turned it off for the night, but I didn't sleep as easily after that. To this day, I still don't understand that dream I had, or if it was some kind of warning, and I don't know what exactly I was seeing on that baby monitor screen. I just don't know what to believe was actually real. I used to work at a Walmart. The Walmart I worked at was open 24 hours back then. Due to my kid's school schedule, I would work overnight shifts so that I would be available to drop him off and pick him up. I would do a 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift every night. During the day, I'd sleep, take care of my son, and work my second job some days. I was exhausted a lot during this time in my life. It wasn't a great time. I had to do what I could to cover rent though. This Walmart was one of the bigger ones. It was a supercenter, not just a grocery store, so it had everything. It was one of the few open 24 hours around here. I think COVID changed that though. When I got there around 10 this one cold night, there was still a decent amount of shoppers in the store. A lot of people would come in for some late night shopping. As the hours would pass, it would of course quiet down tremendously. The late hours of the night would attract a lot of weirder characters, weirder than the usual ones during the day. Into the AM hours of the night, there was only one person working the front of the store, and he or she would be at the self-checkout registers. There were no regular registers open this late. There would also be a couple of stock workers on the floor, which was what I did. Then there would be a couple warehouse workers in the back, who I really didn't ever interact with. They did their own thing. And then there's just the night manager on duty. I was in the cereal aisle doing my usual stock work. I noticed a customer walk past the aisle, then seconds later he stepped back into view at the end of the aisle, stopped, and looked down at me. When I looked back at him, he started looking at the cereal. The guy had curly hair. I couldn't gauge his ethnicity honestly. He had a black backpack on that looked like it was stuffed to the brim with God knows what. He awkwardly lingers in the cereal aisle for a minute, apparently looking at the granola bars. Then he came a little closer to me and asked me where the bread is. I pointed him in the right direction. He said thanks and slowly walked away out of the aisle. I watched him walk away, and he had a very noticeable waddle in his walk. When he was out of sight, he was out of mind though. The problem was that he wasn't out of sight for long. I was in the cereal aisle for quite some time, and I started noticing that every few minutes that guy would slowly pass by the aisle looking down in this direction. He wasn't holding anything. He didn't get any bread. He just had on his big sketchy backpack. I started working faster just so I could finish this aisle and move away from him. When I was done, I brought the empty U-boat platform back to the warehouse, where I grabbed another U-boat full of boxes ready to stock. I purposely picked an aisle far away from the cereal aisle. I was now in the chips aisle. This is also about 45 minutes after initial contact with that guy, so there should have been no way he was still here. But I was wrong. He found me. I was rotating the newer bags of chips behind the older ones on the shelf, and then I looked to my right, and that guy was at the end of the aisle, creeping again. He still had nothing in his hands. This man had been creeping around the store for almost an hour. He then finally approached me as I was dreading he would. I tried to look away until he started to speak. I don't remember word for word what he said, but basically, he said that he's been checking me out, and he couldn't resist coming up to me telling me how beautiful I am. I responded as politely as I could. I did a fake little laugh and said, "No, thank you, that's very sweet." He didn't stop there though. He asked a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from. I gave fake answers to everything. This guy absolutely reeked, and his breath was awful. I was genuinely repulsed. He asked for my number, and I said I'm seeing someone. He said there's nothing wrong with us just being friends. To get him to leave me alone, I gave him a fake number. I then told him I really can't be talking to anyone while I'm working. He made some creepy comment before walking away, thinking he was all suave that he got my number, when in reality he was genuinely creepy and I gave him a fake number. I thought that would be the end of it. Hours went by and time felt like it was going in reverse. I wanted to go home. Then the only other stock worker on the job at that hour suddenly walkie-talkied me, saying there's some creepy looking guy asking for me. I said oh no, and then told her to tell him I left. I then basically made a beeline for the employee lounge, where I planned on hiding for a while. I made it to the lounge and then sat in one of the seats. Then the double doors opened, and in came that guy. He looked at me, and he looked angry. He yelled, "You gave me a fake number, you bitch." I think I swallowed my gum out of fear. I said, "You can't be back here, sir." He then took off his backpack and plopped it on the table next to mine. He started unzipping it as he looked at me. That's when it was time for me to go. I got up and ran past him without thinking. He tried to grab my arm, but he failed. As I ran through the store, I looked back and saw he was running after me. I ran to the front of the store and outside to my car. It was the only thing I could think to do in the moment. Alternatively, I could have tried finding the male warehouse workers in the back, or even the manager, but that was no guarantee. I got to my car and saw the man leave the Walmart looking for me. He was slow, he must have been on something. He saw my car, but it was too late. I was already driving away. I called the night manager and let him know what just went down, and that I'm not comfortable staying there tonight. I also warned him of the man with the backpack full of unknown contents. My manager told me I can't leave the place short-staffed. He said he'd call the police to make sure the man doesn't come back, and he told me to come back. I was adamant about not returning that night, though. He eventually got the message and said he'd review the camera footage, but that I need to come back tomorrow night. And I did. He allegedly notified the police the next day of the man and gave the police department the surveillance footage. I met a lot of characters working that job, but this guy was by far the scariest. I don't know what he was reaching for in his backpack. I don't want to either. I was 14 when this happened. There's a Walmart that's walking distance to my house. I used to sometimes go there to buy clothing and such before I was of driving age, since it was so close. Sometimes I'd go with my friend Emily, sometimes I'd just go alone. The Walmart is part of the nearby mall, but the mall kind of stinks now. Most of the good stores have closed over the years. Plus, I wasn't made of money when I was 14, and Walmart is cheap. One night I walked to Walmart with my AirPods in. It's a 15-minute walk. When I put my AirPods in, I shut out everything else around me. I feel like most people with basic social awareness know that if someone's wearing headphones, it means they don't want to have to take them out to talk to you. I was minding my business in Walmart in the girls' clothing department when I noticed a guy next to me saying something. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but it looked like he was talking to me. I took out my AirPods, and I said, "Are you talking to me?" He said yes. He was this shorter man with gray hair who looked like 50. He had glasses and a clean-shaven face. He smiled and said, "Sorry, I didn't see your headphones." Sure, he didn't. He said he was just telling me how his daughter buys the same exact kind of jeans I was wearing. I had no idea why he was telling me this, but I'm a very polite person to everybody. I always have been. So I chose to be kind to him by laughing and saying, "Oh, that's funny." That should have been the end of an interaction that didn't need to happen, but of course this wouldn't be a story if it was. I was still looking through this rack of tops as the man kept trying to talk to me. He mistook my kindness for actual interest in talking to him, clearly. He asked my age and I said 14, and his response was unsettling. He basically said, "Oh, what a great age. So mature, but still so young." He asked my name, and for some reason I actually gave him my real name. And his response to my name was, "Wow, that's my favorite name for a girl." Next up, he asked what school I went to, and around now was when I decided to start making things up. I said I'm actually not from around here, I'm just visiting my cousin. He couldn't let it go though, and he persisted, asking where I'm from. I said I'm from out of state, keeping it vague. But then he said, "I've seen you around here before. Are you sure you're not from around here?" I looked at him and tried to think of a response, but instead, I ended up turning around and walking away from him. I was for the first time ever actually made very uncomfortable by a stranger. The way he said he's seen me before made me feel as though he'd been watching me or paid attention to me in this Walmart before. I went to buy the jeans I was holding at the front of the Walmart. Then I walked through the store to enter the mall. It was November or December, and they had just put up the Christmas decorations, so I wanted to walk through. And I also wanted to see if any new stores opened, since my shopping in Walmart was cut short. I walked through the mall with really nothing catching my eye. I went into a Victoria's Secret, and while inside of there, I saw through the glass that guy from Walmart sitting on a bench in the mall outside of the Victoria's Secret. I left the store and started walking very quickly through the mall. When I turned around and saw he was now walking behind me, I started to panic and called my mom asking her for a ride because I was being followed by a man. I took her advice and waited in a store with multiple people inside. He came to the entrance of the store and he creepily said my name in this way that he clearly didn't want a lot of people to hear him. I started to feel sick. I went to the cashier and said, "This man is following me. I don't know him." Some customers overheard and looked over,
and the man clearly noticed and started walking away into the mall. The cashier, who was probably only 20 years old herself, sympathized with me. A couple even came over and said they'd wait with me until my mom got here. My mom came into the mall eventually, and I left with her, thanking the couple who waited with me. I didn't go to the mall or that Walmart alone anymore. I didn't even go back with friends for a long time either. I hope that guy got caught being a creep and has been taken off the streets. My worst job ever was working at Walmart. I worked there only for a few months. I hated every minute of it, honestly. I didn't get along with a lot of my coworkers. The customers were crazy and weird, and I felt like a lot of people just generally were unfriendly. I was 24, and Walmart was my second job to make ends meet with my new apartment. Sometimes I'd work register, sometimes I'd work the desk outside the fitting room, and sometimes I'd work general sales associate. On this day, I was a general associate, walking around the place assisting customers and straightening things on the shelves. I interacted with a bunch of people that day. I still remember dealing with some of the dumbest customers I'd ever had the displeasure of interacting with, but nothing could have prepared me for who I was going to run into that day. I got a random pat on the back, and I turned around to see my ex-girlfriend Casey. She looked super happy to see me and went in for a hug. I was surprised because she didn't live anywhere near here. I asked what brought her here, and she said she heard through a mutual friend that I started working here recently. Casey and I did not leave off on good terms at all. She had been harassing me for a while since I had broken up with her, and I had to end up blocking her on everything to get her to stop. She was insanely controlling throughout our relationship, and downright obsessive, bipolar, and paranoid. And after I ended things with her, she wouldn't stop trying to contact me and meet up with me to talk things out, even though we had talked things out multiple times. She even left multiple voicemails crying. I take no joy in any of that. I don't say any of this to belittle her or make a joke of mental illness, but she has issues, and I came to learn that, and I had to tell her multiple times her behavior is not normal. Her finding out I got this job and coming to my place of work I was not okay with. Even though I hugged her back and was cordial at first in this interaction, I eventually cut the crap and said, "Why are you here?" The fake friendliness stopped here on both sides. Her face got more serious, and she started telling me that it's really messed up that I block her out of my life like this. I told her this is the exact kind of behavior that made me block her. Showing up to my job is not normal. Then I started asking her which mutual friend told her that I worked here. She claimed that's irrelevant, and I assured her it most certainly is not irrelevant, because I didn't believe that anyone told her where I work. I had broken up with Casey many months ago. She should have had no way of knowing about my new job or apartment, and I was confident none of my friends were even in contact with her anymore. I told her I'm seeing someone else now. I have to get back to work. Please leave and don't contact me again. She refused to leave, so I simply just started walking away to an employees only area. She didn't follow me back there. It was at this moment I actually started considering trying to get a restraining order. After my shift was over, it had to be like 11 p.m., closing time. I left the store and went straight home. My roommate was home, his car was in the driveway. I parked next to him and went inside. I went straight to the kitchen to make myself a late dinner, as I always would after closing shifts. I microwaved some frozen meal and went to the living room to play video games. For a while, this was my only time to unwind and do what I wanted. I played for maybe an hour, then went to bed. I woke up not long after falling asleep. I thought I heard something. I looked up and realized my bedroom door was open. I definitely did not do that. My roommate Paul goes to bed really early because he works early, and there's no chance he'd just get up and randomly open my door. I got up and walked out into the living room. I turned on a lamp and looked around the place. I went over to the front door, and it was unlocked. What the hell was going on? I was thinking, did Paul leave? I looked out the window and saw that his car was still there. I locked the front door. Then I went to his bedroom door and tried opening it. It was locked. I knocked on the door lightly once, and he didn't respond, so he was asleep. I was genuinely confused. I went out front and looked under the pot where we kept a hidden spare key. It wasn't there. My heart was in my throat at this point. The only person in this world besides Paul and my family who knows that I like to hide a spare key outside is Casey. I checked at least 5 times under the pot. even checking the surrounding area on the chance that maybe it was kicked out of place or something. I went back inside the house and shut the front door. I went to the knife holder in the kitchen, and the biggest knife was missing. My phone was still in my bedroom. I had to be smart about this. I tiptoed to my bedroom door until I was close enough to grab the doorknob as fast as I could and slam it shut from the outside. I screamed as loud as I could for Paul. He erupted from his room, obviously confused, and there were suddenly bangs on the bedroom door from the other side, along with Casey's voice saying, "I'm sorry, let's talk." I held the door closed with all my might as she kept trying to pull it open. Paul called the police as I held the door. After a few minutes of this, Casey stopped trying to pull the door open, and she was hysterically crying on the other side of the door. Finally, the police arrived and came inside. I moved away from the door, and the officers made sure Casey dropped the knife before she came out. She was of course arrested, and I didn't even have to press charges. She was charged by the state for, I believe, burglary in the 2nd degree, and she's currently serving a pretty lengthy prison term for this. I'm honestly shocked she didn't get charged for attempted murder. It's a sick situation all around. I don't know when she'll be out. I'll have been long moved out of this place by then. My biggest regret is not catching the red flags with her early on.
My name is Ethan, and I'm a photographer. I took a trip last year with my wife to the Colorado mountains for an art project. My wife is also an avid skier, so she talked me into adding skiing into the trip. We had the option to book a room at a ski resort or rent out a private log cabin. The second one seemed more romantic, so I picked that one. Plus, it didn't hurt that it was cheaper. The cabin was nothing luxurious or anything. It was a single-floor, 4-room little thing. A 2-person bedroom, a small living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It may have been small, but the actual idea of being secluded in a warm log cabin during a blizzard was amazing. However, the storm was interfering with the cable signal, so we didn't have much to do this one particular evening. It was just starting to get dark out at this point, but there was still a decent amount of light outside, so I thought it would be perfect for getting a few shots and videos in the blizzard for backgrounds and wallpapers. I told my wife I'd be back within 10 minutes and slipped on my boots and coat. The moment I stepped outside and shut the door, I noticed footsteps leading up to the door in the snow that had blown under the wooden awning. I could see the prints doubled as whoever left them there turned and went the opposite direction. I was freaked the fuck out, but I wasn't about to go inside and scare my wife. I decided to give in to my curiosity and followed the prints to the right side of the cabin. Right away, I noticed that they led to the bedroom window. My heart froze in fear when I saw this. I could see my wife sitting on the bed using her iPad. She noticed me and I waved. She laughed. I continued to follow the footprints around the cabin to the other side. They led to the living room window on the other side. Someone was stalking us, but how long ago was the question? I found myself standing there for a good minute asking myself if I should follow the footprints anymore. For whatever reason, I decided I would. They were now leading away from the cabin. I knew I was following the prints to where this person was going, not coming from, simply by the boot marks. I followed the prints away from the opening and into the trees. That was where I saw him. A man wearing a black coat facing a tree, slouched down looking at the ground. He was still as a statue, and I could see the snow piling up on his hood and shoulders. I froze in my tracks, trying not to make a sound. I would have thought to ask him if he needed help otherwise, but this guy was just standing there not doing anything, like some kind of deranged freak. I started to gradually move backwards without even turning around, making sure this man didn't turn around or notice me. When I got at a visual distance, I turned around and stomped through the snow back to the cabin. When I slammed the door shut, my wife came over to see what was wrong. I saw worry in her eyes. I guess she saw the worry in mine. She knew I saw something, and after a few minutes of harassment, I finally told her what I saw. She immediately started packing her things, telling me we're leaving right away. I told her no, we're not going anywhere. I would not get a refund for leaving early, and I wasn't about to up and leave just because some weird guy was walking around outside. She made a point of locking both locks on the door and making sure all of the windows were sealed shut. For the rest of the night, we read stuff on our iPads. I reviewed the pictures and videos I had taken so far. We turned out the lights early as there wasn't much else to do. "What if he's still out there?" I remember my wife asking me. "There's no way he's still out there," I then assured her. Listening to the wind blowing outside, along with the small flakes of snow hitting the windows, was strangely relaxing, and I knew I'd be able to fall asleep quickly. Except if it wasn't for the knock at the bedroom window. We were both still awake, and we both knew it was a knock from a person. I ushered my wife out of bed and out into the living room without turning on any lights. There was nothing to use as a weapon whatsoever. Our only option was to run before something might happen. I told my wife we'd have to forget our luggage and make a dash for the Jeep. We slipped on our boots and coats in the dark in a matter of seconds, and when we heard a knock at the living room window from the opposite side of our car, we took that opportunity to run. I pressed the unlock button, so grateful I chose to have remote locks on my Wrangler, and we hopped in. The car started with ease, and as soon as the headlights flashed on, the man was standing facing the log cabin on our side now. Not a window, just facing the wall of the cabin in the same position I had seen him in earlier, as if he were hiding his face. We drove to the nearby ski resort without much trouble in the Jeep. We stayed there for the night and went back the next day to the log cabin to collect our things we left behind. He wasn't there. When I was 17 years old and I was home alone, coincidentally on the night that I tried pot for the first time, I experienced the most horrifying moment of my life. It was mid-December, during a late fall snowstorm. I was in my room with some movie on in the background, Mrs. Doubtfire if I recall correctly, though I wasn't paying attention to it. I was trying to figure out how to properly inhale without coughing. I think I spent about half an hour breathing in smoke from that pipe, yet I couldn't even tell if I felt any different. For maybe another 10 minutes I still continued at it, and finally, I felt a little different. It was a new feeling, hard to explain at the time. I felt as if the room around me felt more calming, and I was more attentive to my surroundings, or maybe less attentive, I couldn't really tell. All I know is I felt different. I was excited, I wanted to keep going. Then suddenly I felt as if I heard a sound come from downstairs. I muted my TV and listened. It sounded like there was a tapping noise coming from the front door, like a light knocking. I got nervous that it was my parents or sister, as I didn't know if I'd be noticeably acting differently or if they would be able to pick up on the smell from around the house. I headed downstairs and looked through the peephole, not to find my parents or sister, but a severely underdressed, almost homeless-looking man. To put this into perspective, we don't live in the kind of suburbs that a lot of you most likely live in. We don't exactly live in a completely desolate area either. We have neighbors, but houses are about 200 yards apart from each other, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a decent distance. So on a dark, stormy night like this where we live, with some random dirty-looking man who I'd never seen before standing on my porch, I naturally pretended I wasn't home. I stood there and kept watching through the peephole as the guy stayed put, proceeding to knock on the door again, this time louder. I knew I wasn't going to answer, so I walked back upstairs to my room and shut the door. In a sense, I felt bad, but I would never let a stranger into my house, and I couldn't imagine what else he could have wanted other than to be let in. Time passed as I continued hitting the pipe, getting more adjusted to it and starting to really feel its effects. I felt like my mind was wandering, forgetting I was even laying in my bed, or even in my bedroom for that matter, when there was a loud thud at my window. I jumped up quicker than a mousetrap when I heard it. It sounded like a rock had hit my window. I shut off the TV now, the only source of light in the bedroom. Now it was pitch black. It took me a while to connect this with the man who was at the stoop. He was out there, I was in here, and there's nothing he could do to me, I somehow assured myself. However, being high only made me more paranoid and afraid of every little noise. In fact, I seemed to be more alert to every sound, even the small little house noises like random cracks in the walls. Nothing happened after a few minutes, and being in the pitch black darkness kind of tired me out. That, and apparently I just learned that pot puts you to sleep more effectively than sleeping pills. I awoke sometime later, thinking it must have been like 3 in the morning, but I looked at the clock and it said it was only 1:45. I had only been asleep for like 20 minutes. I sat up thinking I heard something from down in the den. I rubbed my eyes and then remembered the man. My heart started racing again. I was about to get up when I realized something. Across the room, there was something beyond my half-open door. I leaned in and squinted my eyes. There was somebody peering into the room at me from behind the door. I let out the most horrified and gut-wrenching scream possible as the person then emerged from the door and started walking over to my bed in the dark. I just need a warm place to stay. I had no choice but to shove him to the floor when he made it to my bed. It was then that I realized he was a very skinny and weak man. I was able to drag him up and push him to the front door with force. He tried to fight and resist, but he was too weak to do anything. He was crazy. I could see it in his eyes. I shoved him outside and locked the door and then called the cops. I stayed downstairs where he had broken the glass to get inside just to make sure he couldn't get back in. When the cops arrived, they found him sitting in my front bushes curled up in a ball. They took him to the station and he was no longer my problem. So do I feel bad about this today? I guess I do a little. He was undoubtedly crazy, but I don't know how dangerous he was. It was still either way the scariest experience of my life. When I was younger, me and my friends would always have big manhunt games in the snow. This one January night when we were 13 and there was this crazy blizzard going on, we continued our tradition. We had a group of 6 people playing, 3 on each team. The game was more or less tag, but it involved hiding and running to an assigned safe point, which for us was the front stoop. It was fun in the summer, but the snow only made it so much better, what with the snow adding as a hiding and slowing down factor, hunting down footprints, and even using snowballs as weapons to slow down chasers. It was the most fun game of our childhoods. Until this particular year, things turned pretty bad. It was our turn to hide. I'll give you the names of my teammates to make things more easy to follow. Dan and Christian. Dan hopped the fence to someone's backyard on the other side of the block, which wasn't really cheating as we had no limits with this game. Christian jumped on top of my other friend's shed in the backyard and hid behind the sloped roof. I thought I'd be sneaky and started running all around the backyard to create a seemingly endless trail of footprints. When our friends from the other side of the house announced that they were coming, I had to think quickly. I did something that wasn't too pleasant. First, I signaled for Christian atop the roof to run if I were to run myself, and then I hopped in the bushes and lay flat in the snow. 2 of the others entered the backyard and started analyzing the crazy footprint path I created. I knew it would lead to me though, so I had to be ready to run if they got close. They were getting closer to the bushes I was hiding in, so Christian jumped down from the shed into the snow and darted for the front lawn. The 2 chased after him in both directions. I knew the stoop would be guarded right now, so I took this opportunity to better hide myself. I decided to follow Dan's approach and hopped onto the roof of the shed, then over the fence to that backyard on the other side of the block. I didn't see Dan anywhere though. I looked for his footprints, but quickly found some other kind of tracks in the snow. By the fence were a few boot marks from where Dan must have landed, but then quickly the marks turned to a steady trail of something being pushed or dragged through the snow. I followed the trail to the back door of the pitch-black house, and then it stopped. I quickly put 2 and 2 together, and my heart sank. I turned and headed back for the fence to hop over and call for my friend's parents, but about halfway across the yard,
I heard the sliding door to the house open, and someone wearing a black coat with a hood covering their face emerged and started stomping over to me. I screamed like a girl as I pulled myself up over the fence, just barely making it before he could grab my legs. All my friends came running into the backyard. Then shortly after, my friend's parents came out the back door. I told them what happened, and the mom phoned the police, while the dad stormed to the other side of the block with a gun and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so he let himself in as we watched. The door was unlocked. He had us wait outside, and within a few minutes, came out with Dan in his arms. He was knocked out. His face looked red and wounded, as if he were hit in the face by a shovel or something. There was no car in the driveway, indicating the guy left when I escaped his yard. He never returned to his house, and I'm pretty sure he's still wanted by police to this day. It just goes to show, anybody out there, even your next door neighbor, may be a predator, just waiting for an opportunity to strike.
I once had 2 job interviews in North Carolina. I lived in New York at the time. I was taking the drive down there instead of flying to save money. My at the time job sucked, and the 2 jobs I was interviewing for could finally be a new start for me. They were corporate office jobs with a lot of benefits and good salaries. Plus, the weather would be much better than New York. I was driving down there on a Thursday night. I took off from work Friday because that's when the 2 interviews were. Since I had to work Thursday, I had to hit the road as soon as I was off work. I stopped home first to grab my suitcase and other stuff I was bringing. Then I said goodbye to my family and set off. It was a long 8+ hour drive ahead of me. My ETA was into the early hours of the morning, like 2 a.m. I was heading to a Comfort Inn. I drank like 3 cups of coffee my first few hours driving, and for a while I was good. But if you're already running on fumes, no amount of coffee is going to keep you going. I already didn't get much sleep the night before because I was stressing over these interviews, and after a long, busy day at work, the last thing I wanted to be doing was driving close to 9 hours. It was late at night now. I had about 2 hours left in the drive. There were very few other cars on the road this late at night on a weeknight. I was starting to feel really sleepy now, but I knew most of the drive was behind me. Suddenly, on the side of the highway, I saw a man in a suit standing there, not walking, not moving. He was facing my car, and as I looked at him as I passed, I saw his face turning to follow my car. I said out loud, "What the fuck?" It was truly bizarre. I almost contemplated turning around and asking if he needed a ride. He was just in the middle of the highway in a suit at like 12:30 at night. I came up with stories in my head about what may have happened, like maybe his girlfriend kicked him out of the car. I did this to keep my mind awake as I felt like I was drifting away. Then something beyond frightening happened. It was only maybe 10 minutes after I had seen that man that I saw another man on the side of the road coming up, also in a suit, also just standing there. What the hell was going on? I slowed down to pull to the side of the road and possibly ask if everything was okay, and maybe offer a ride. I don't know what I was thinking, but either way, when I was on the shoulder almost to a stop, I looked in the rearview mirror and then turned around completely, and that man was gone, as if he just disappeared. I stepped on the gas and got back on the road. I was losing it. I needed to stop for another coffee. I had about an hour and a half to go at this point. I stopped at the first pit stop I could find and bought a medium coffee. I drank a few sips, but as I was sitting in the rest area gas station parking lot, I spotted a man in a suit again, standing under a light post. It was the same man. This time I got a clearer view of his face. He looked like a middle-aged white man, short dark brown hair, clean-shaven, and a neutral expression. But it was the way he was once again facing my car that freaked me the fuck out. I turned the car on and got out of there without looking back. I wanted to complete this drive, but the coffee wasn't doing it. I felt like I was going to pass out behind the wheel. I wasn't going to make it, so I pulled off the highway and parked in a random parking lot.
I angled the seat all the way down and I attempted to go to sleep. As tired as I was, I couldn't help but be scared in this empty parking lot. Scared that if I opened my eyes, I would see that man in the suit again. I was drifting into a sleep when something made me wake up again and open my eyes. Probably my mind playing tricks on me again. I looked around the outside of my car, scared I was going to see him. I looked out each window and then the front windshield, and it was clear. Then I looked in the rearview mirror, and I felt my soul leave my body for a second, because there I saw for a second a person in the back seat. I'm sure it was the man in the suit again, but I didn't look long enough because I opened the door, screamed, and fell backwards out of the car as I crawled back. I kept screaming until I finally got up, looked inside the car, and saw nobody. The back seat was empty. As I came to my senses, I realized my mind had been playing tricks on me all night. There is no man in a suit. I'm just completely exhausted and need to sleep. I got back in my car, my heart racing. Honestly now though, I was too awake to go to sleep. I turned the car back on and finished my coffee and banged out the rest of the drive. By the time I checked into the hotel and got to the room, I fell into the bed and passed out right away. The next day, my first interview was at 11 a.m., so I didn't get much sleep, but I definitely felt somewhat recharged. However, the second my interviewer walked out to greet me, I froze up. My interviewer looked identical to the image of that man in the suit I kept hallucinating the night before. I know the interviewer noticed me freeze up. I could see it in his face. I tried to recover from this, but it set the tone for the rest of the interview, and I was completely nervous and out of it. I felt like I were in a dream. I left that interview with only an hour to get ready for my next one, and my next interviewer was a woman. I did much better with this one, because I actually got the job. I still work here and live in North Carolina now. My old therapist told me that she thinks the stress of mentally preparing for the interviews mixed with the lack of sleep caused me to hallucinate the main cause of my fear and stress. And so I hallucinated a man in a suit because that's who I pictured would be interviewing me. I feel like it doesn't sound too far-fetched, but it doesn't change how downright horrific the whole ordeal was. I was driving in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania one night to avoid traffic getting home. It was probably a little past midnight at this point, and the road was basically deserted, just the way I like it. I was listening to my usual podcast on the radio when a ding came from my car, alerting me that I was low on fuel. I put a pit stop into my Maps app for the nearest gas station, which was a little ways up the secluded road. About 5 minutes later, I pulled into the gas station on the right, the only parking lot for miles, as this road was basically nothing but woods on each side. The gas station was some generic, no-name gas station. I pulled next to the pump and noticed a man filling up the tank of his old beater pickup truck. He was looking at me as I walked past him and into the shop. Inside the shop, I bought a coffee and paid cash for my gas. When I came back outside, I noticed the man at the pump getting into his pickup truck, then driving away. After a couple of minutes of filling up the tank, I got back in my car and continued my drive. But not even a minute after leaving the station, I noticed on the side of the road on the grass was that same pickup truck from the gas station. It was just sitting next to the woods, turned off. Interesting. I kept driving, looking in my rearview mirror to see if it would turn on. Nope. I turned my podcast back on and continued my drive. A few minutes passed though, and I heard another ding come from my car. My dashboard screen showed that one of my tires was very low. I slowed down and started hearing a wobbling sound. I opened a window and knew right away I had a flat tire. I pulled to the side of the road and went to investigate. It was my rear driver's side tire. It was flat. I didn't think I hit anything. I would have felt it. The thought came to my head, what if that guy at the gas station slashed it? I took out my phone and was looking up the number for my roadside assistance company on Google. I heard the sound of a car or truck engine a little down the road behind me, but oddly I didn't see any headlights. It was just pitch black down there. Then the sound of the engine suddenly stopped, and it was quiet again. I went to my trunk to grab the SOS flashlight out of my toolbox my dad gave me one year as a Christmas present. I grabbed the long light rod, turned it on, and aimed it down the road. I saw the reflection of a truck's headlights, pulled on the side of the road about 200 feet away. It looked like that pickup truck again. I gasped and ran into the woods and ducked behind a big bush and tree. I took out my phone and called 911. I heard the sound of the truck down the road starting, and this time the headlights were on. I heard and saw through the bush the truck pull up next to my car, and then after a short moment of silence, a man yelled out, "You need some help?" I knew better than to answer. 911 picked up, and I whispered into the phone my location, and that someone slashed my tire, and that I think the person who did it was right here following me. The lady asked a bunch of standard questions, asking me to describe the man and his truck. I heard the truck door open and close. I told the lady over the phone that the man got out of his truck. She told me to remain hidden in the woods if I thought he was a threat. She asked if I could see if he was armed, and that's when the call disconnected. I had shitty cell reception here. I waited, hoping she would call me back. I'm sure she was trying to, but it wouldn't go through. I heard the sound of another passing car on the road. It was slowing down. Then I heard talking. It was the voice of another man. I crept closer to the edge of the woods to get a view of the road. I saw the man from the pickup truck standing next to this other stopped pickup truck in the middle of the road. He was talking to a person in the truck. I overheard the creepy man coming up with this fake explanation as to what was going on here. At that moment, I rushed into the road yelling, "Help, I don't know him." Both the man in the truck and the man who followed me looked over to me. I said to the man in the truck that this man slashed my tire and followed me here. The man in the truck's reaction was to look at the man with a disturbed look. The creepy man denied having done anything to my tires and claimed he's never seen me ever. At the same time, he hurried away to his pickup truck and started backing up until he cleared both of our vehicles, then drove off. The man in the other pickup truck got out and examined my flat, then offered me a ride into town. I told him I had police officers on the way, and sure enough, within a few minutes, a cop car with its lights on pulled up beside us. The man vouched for me when I told him about the other man. The police officer said he'd go down to the gas station and request to see the camera footage to see if it caught the pickup driver actually slashing my tire. The officer took my info, and he waited with me while I waited for the roadside assistance company. The tow truck driver gave me a ride to a shop where my dad picked me up. I never heard from that police officer, so I guess he didn't see anything in that video footage. It's scary how close I was to probably being abducted, though. It was the most horrific, haunting night of my life. It still sends shivers down my spine. I'm 28 years old, and my boyfriend Todd lives in a different state from me. We take turns visiting each other for the most part, but I'll usually end up visiting him more often because he has his own place, and I still live with my sister as a roommate. I was going up there for a week because it was winter break, and I had off because I'm a teacher, so I packed a lot. I was taking up there my crappy '09 Hyundai Sonata that I bought for my sister. Up where Todd lives, there was snow on the ground at this point, so the more north I got, the more careful I had to be driving, as that car was not really built for driving in the snow. It was on the later side, and unfortunately, it was starting to snow really hard now. There were blizzard warnings earlier, but both Todd and I agreed it would be better to try and beat the blizzard tonight rather than come tomorrow when the roads are full of snow. I started to accept the fact that I'd need to stay somewhere for the night, as I was still too far away, and the roads were getting bad. After stopping for a quick sandwich and some coffee at a small diner, the waitress who I was conversing with told me there's no way I should be on the roads right now. She recommended a few hotels and motels in the area. Then, after she walked away and I was left alone to finish up eating, a guy sitting at the bar spun in his chair and said to me there's a motel right up the road from here. When I put the motel's name into my phone, it said it was literally 5 minutes away. He said it was nice and cheap too, so I could just get a quick night's rest and get back on the road tomorrow. He really seemed to overhear my whole conversation with the waitress. He was also just sitting there at the bar with a beer. I'd never seen a person go to a diner just to drink. I didn't even know diners really served alcohol. But people up by Todd are a little weird. To me at least, because I grew up in the city. The man introduced himself as Toby, and I gave him a fake name saying I was Michelle. The rest of my time there, Toby was half facing me in his spinning bar stool, and I wasn't really looking to keep talking to him. So I looked away out the window to the snow until the waitress gave me my check.
Then I said goodbye to them both as I left. In that half hour I spent in the diner, the snow accumulated at least an inch. I needed to get to that motel ASAP. I drove slow and was at the motel in a few minutes, maybe 10. There were a couple cars in the lot. It looked like a cheap motel, which was all I needed. I didn't want to waste money anyway. I went to the front desk and asked for a room for a night. I think I paid around $50, and the man at the desk handed me a key to one of the downstairs rooms. I walked back outside to my car to get my stuff and bring it inside. It was a tiny little room with tacky wallpaper, a queen-sized bed, and a red carpet. It was fine for the night. I tried to FaceTime Todd, but there was no reception at all here. The motel had Wi-Fi, but the password was probably at the front desk. So I put my shoes back on and hurried outside through the cold snow to the front desk. On my way there, I noticed there was a new car in the parking lot. I saw someone sitting inside of it, but I didn't take the time to look at who it could have been because realistically, who does that? The man at the front desk emotionlessly pointed to the free Wi-Fi sign with the password, and I typed it in. It took a minute, but I was connected. I went back to my room in a hurry, locked the door, and FaceTimed Todd. Even with Wi-Fi, the connection was so shitty. I could see his face, but it would freeze frame for like 5 seconds, and his voice would cut as well. I was able to at least communicate with him that I was safe in the motel. We decided to just text instead because the FaceTime wasn't really working. We were texting back and forth for a few minutes. Then I heard something come from the bathroom. I leaned forward and saw that the bathroom door was shut. Was it shut before? I didn't remember. I texted Todd that I heard something in the bathroom, and I started freaking out because I realized I ran to the front desk without locking the motel room door. He asked if the door locks by itself. I said I don't think so, but now I also don't remember if I left the door cracked open or not. He told me to get up and check the door to see if it locks by itself when it closes, and to bring the key with me. I got up, put my shoes on, and saw that the door had a traditional twisting lock that moved with the knob from the inside or the key on the outside. I opened the door, looking to confirm this, but I noticed instantly the extra set of footprints leading to my door. These footprints led from that car that I saw someone sitting in to my door, and nobody was in that car anymore. I felt like screaming, but instead I closed the door to my room and ran to the front desk. I cried to the man that there's an intruder in my room. The front desk worker was not some huge jacked dude, so I don't think he was wanting to go confronting someone. He told me to wait in here, and he called someone. I thought he was calling the police, but instead he started speaking in some other language. I think he was calling a friend or associate. He hung up and told me again to just sit tight in here with him. I was standing in a position where I could see out the glass down to my room, and I let out a shriek when I saw the door to my room open and that man Toby from the diner walking to his car. We locked eyes for a second before he got in his car and backed out onto the unplowed roads, disappearing slowly down the road. The front desk worker's associate or friend or whoever it was arrived a while later. He was this big guy who didn't speak English. I don't know what they were saying to each other, but the front desk worker told me he would give me a different room free of charge to make me feel better. I didn't feel better, but I didn't have any other options of places to stay at this point. I took the new key, and the two men helped me move my stuff into the new room. Todd offered to come here, but I told him not to. It would be too long and too dangerous to drive in the dark and the snow. The next morning, the streets were somewhat plowed, enough to get through the rest of the drive to Todd's. Looking back, I don't like how that motel worker probably didn't call the cops because he didn't want his motel to get any negative attention. I called that diner to warn them about that man. I have no trust in strangers anymore. Not after this. I've gone back and forth about whether to share this, but I think I need to put it somewhere. This happened when I was a sophomore at school in the Northeast. I won't say which one, and I'm in Kappa. I'm an English major,
and I've always taken my academics pretty seriously because I'm trying to get into law school after I graduate. That's relevant context for what I'm about to tell you. Last semester, I enrolled in this upper-level course on English Romanticism. The class was pretty small, maybe 25 students in total, and it was mostly juniors and seniors. There was a professor who led the seminars, of course, but most of the actual teaching was done by the TA during discussion sections. His name was Romer, and yes, that was his real name. I still don't know if it was a first or last name situation, but that's what everyone called him. He was maybe late 20s, kind of lanky, and gave off this I'm in a band but not a good one type of energy. He was kind of just an oddball. Anyway, the class itself was fine. A lot of close reading, a lot of discussion about nature and memory, and all that romantic nonsense. But participation was pretty dead most days. People would just sit there and wait for Romer to fill the silence, which he hated. You could tell it made him uncomfortable, which was problematic because then he'd start cold calling on people and chirping at them when they clearly didn't know what was going on. There was one guy, though, who always seemed to keep things alive. His name was Luke. He was tall with brown hair, and the only other thing I knew about him was that he was in one of the better frats on campus. He had this way of making jokes at just the right moment, not to be annoying, but to break the tension when things got awkward, and he actually did the reading, which was rare. When he talked, it was clear he knew his stuff, so the humor felt earned. He wasn't trying to be the class clown, he just had a presence. I remember thinking he was smart but kind of goofy. Anyway, since I needed to participate for my GPA, I ended up being one of the only other people who talked regularly. So it was usually me, Luke, and maybe 2 or 3 others carrying the discussion while everyone else zoned out. Romer seemed to appreciate it. He'd nod along when I made a point, and sometimes he'd build on what I said in a way that felt validating. For my first essay, and I remember this vividly, I wrote about ambiguity in Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey. It wasn't groundbreaking, but I was proud of it. When I got it back, Romer had written these long, detailed comments in the margins, not just corrections, actual agreement with my ideas. But after that, I noticed things started to shift a bit. Romer began paying more attention to me in class. He'd call on me more often, ask follow-up questions to my answers, make eye contact with me for long periods of time, stuff like that. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. TAs take a liking to certain students all the time. It's not that unusual. But then he started asking me things that felt less academic. I brushed it off though. I had other things going on. Around the same time, I started running into Luke more and more outside of class. Our sorority and his fraternity had a lot of overlap. I think Greek life is mostly stupid, but we were both in, I guess, what you'd consider top houses at our school. So we had a lot of joint mixers, date nights, and just always went to the same parties. And Luke was just always there. So naturally, we just ended up talking more and more, and I started taking a liking to him. After a few weeks of this, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime, and I said sure. We went on maybe 3 dates before things progressed. He was sweet, attentive, you know, all the things you'd want. We started sleeping together, and everything felt normal. I wasn't head over heels or anything, but I liked him. It was uncomplicated, low maintenance, and mostly painless. One afternoon after class, I was walking to my car when I saw Luke standing behind the lecture hall, smoking a cigarette with Romer. They were talking like they knew each other, which struck me as weird. I didn't even know Luke smoked. When I asked him about it later, he laughed and said he was just trying to get on Romer's good side so he wouldn't have to try as hard toward the end of the semester. I told him that was kind of pathetic, and he laughed and said he'd take pathetic over a bad grade any day. A few weeks later, when I came back, I noticed his phone was lying next to him on the bed, with a YouTube video playing. I know I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity got the better of me. Can you blame me? I'm a college girl in a sorority. The types of guys I'm surrounded by would cause any rational person to develop trust issues. So I went through his phone. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find, but I was definitely not expecting to find a collection of photos of me. And there were a lot of them. Some were more benign. Photos of me going about my day, or studying, or walking to class. But there were others. I'll let you fill in the blanks yourself, but they were, let's just say, suggestive. Some of them were ones I'd sent him, but there were quite a few that I had no recollection of ever taking. I wasn't mad or anything, mostly creeped out. Like, if he had asked me for most of them, I probably wouldn't have been opposed at all. I didn't wake him up that night. I just went back to sleep, not really knowing how to feel. I ended up keeping things to myself, partly because I was embarrassed, but partly because I didn't want him to know I'd snooped through his phone. A week later, after he'd fallen asleep again, I decided to try guessing his password, which actually wasn't too hard. It was just his birthday, but reversed. This time, I went deeper. Brace yourself, because things move really fast from this point forward. I checked his messages, his deleted photos, everything, and I found something horrifying. He'd been sending photos of me, those photos of me, to an unsaved number, regularly for weeks. Basically the entire duration of time we'd been seeing each other. It was sick, and it was probably illegal too, but I couldn't think about that. I was shaking. I took pictures of everything, and then I started to cry. I couldn't control myself. I basically slapped him awake and demanded to know who the number belonged to, and he stumbled through this ridiculous story about how it was just his backup phone, how he liked to have copies of everything in case his main phone got lost. I knew instantly that was bullshit. I stormed out before he could convince me to stay. I was a complete wreck. I was a psychological mess, and I felt gross. I really didn't want to get into the immediate aftermath of everything, so I won't. Just know that it was probably the worst week of my life. The last thing I need is for that trauma to reopen if anyone figures out who I am or anything. So that's another reason I'm keeping the details to a minimum. The unknown number ended up belonging to Romer, my TA. The police got involved, and Luke confessed pretty quickly once they started pressing him. He admitted that Romer had been paying him, hundreds of dollars apparently, in exchange for photos. The whole thing had been going on since the beginning of the semester, maybe longer. I don't know all the details, and honestly, I don't want to. Luke got expelled from university, and Romer got fired. I'm pretty sure there was jail time involved as well, although I do remember thinking whatever punishment they got wasn't nearly enough to make me feel compensated. That was over a year and a half ago. I'm a senior now, and I'm almost done with school. I'm kind of relieved about that, to be honest. I've dealt with things in my own way, and I won't get into that, but I thought everything was behind me. A few weeks ago, though, I started noticing something. There's this silver sedan that's been parked outside my sorority late at night. Not every night, but enough that I've started paying attention. I haven't seen anyone get in or out of it. I don't know if it's one of them. I'm probably being paranoid, but it's really freaking me out. And honestly, I'm not sure how they'd even know I live here now. I moved into the house well after the Luke situation. Anyway, if anything else happens, I'll update. This happened like 2 weeks ago. I'm still not fully over it, but I need to get it out there because keeping it to myself is driving me insane. My name is Mike, but everyone calls me Mikey. I'm 22, and I'm still living with my parents in Northern California. And before you ask, no, it's not the California you're picturing. I always have to explain this to people. Not every part of the state is beaches and palm trees. Where I live, it snows pretty heavily. We're talking middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest, closest neighbor is a 10-minute drive kind of situation. I've been skiing my whole life, so the cold doesn't bother me. If anything, I prefer it, but that's not really the point. The point is that 2 weekends ago, my parents flew out of the country for a wedding. Some friend of my mom's was getting married in Portugal, and I wasn't invited, but I didn't really care about that. A weekend alone in the house sounded kind of nice. Our house isn't anything special, just your standard 3-bedroom, 1-story, nothing fancy. My parents' room is at one end of the hall, mine is at the other, and there's a guest room in between that we mostly use for storage. The living room and kitchen are in the middle of the house, and the front door opens right into the living room. I'm describing this because it'll be important later. The first night alone was fine. I went to bed around 2 a.m. and passed out pretty quickly. The second night is when everything went wrong. I went to bed around the same time, maybe a little earlier. I remember being more tired than usual, so I knocked out fast. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was the middle of the night.
That's pretty irregular for me. I knew something woke me up because I always have to keep my phone on airplane mode when I sleep. So it wasn't that, but I had no idea what it could have been. I scanned the room, but it was pitch black. As my eyes started adjusting to the darkness, though, I saw something strange. My closet door was wide open. I always keep that door closed, always. It's one of those sliding doors that doesn't stay shut on its own, so I make a point of closing it every night before bed. I know that sounds weird, but I've had to think about open closet doors since I was a little kid. The point is, I didn't leave it open. I know I didn't. I started freaking out a little. My brain was doing that thing where it's trying to convince you that you're still dreaming, but I knew I wasn't. I was fully awake. I could feel my heart starting to pound, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really, really wrong. Without thinking, I reached over to my nightstand, grabbed my phone, and turned the flashlight on. I literally screamed when I saw them. There were two figures standing at the edge of my bed, just standing there. Before I could make out any features, they scattered in opposite directions like they were trying to avoid the light beam. It was freaky how fast they moved, almost like they knew I had been about to turn the light on. I started flailing my phone around, trying to keep it on them, but they were too quick. I heard something clatter to the floor, but I didn't have time to process it. I just started screaming. I don't even know what I was screaming. I think I was just making noise out of pure panic. The two figures bolted from my bedroom door. I heard their footsteps pounding down the hallway, and I started chasing them before I could have a second thought. By the time I got out of bed and made it to the hall, though, I heard the front door slam. I ran to the living room, but they were already gone. I stood there in the living room for I don't even know how long. My hands were shaking, and I was just trying to focus on catching my breath. The moment I regained my composure, I ran back to my room, locked the door, and called 911. While I was waiting for the police in the safety of my locked room, I finally turned the light back on. That's when I looked down at the floor by the edge of my bed and saw what had clattered during the commotion. It was one of my mom's kitchen knives. I almost threw up. I'm not kidding. Those people had been standing over me with a knife while I was sleeping. If I hadn't woken up when I did, I don't even want to think about what would have happened. I probably wouldn't have woken up. The police showed up maybe 20 minutes later. They searched the entire property, but there was no sign of anyone, of course. They took my statement, asked me a bunch of questions, and then one of the officers told me I must have forgotten to lock the front door. I told him I remembered locking it, but he just kind of shrugged and said that was the only explanation, being as there were no signs of forced entry, and every other door and window throughout the entire house was locked. The only thing that even could have been unlocked was the front door. I accepted that and watched them leave, but I knew I locked the front door. Fast forward through the nonsense of my parents getting home the next day and scolding me all over again for forgetting to lock the front door. There's no need to get into that. It's been 2 weeks now, and I still don't have an explanation. Forget whether the door had been locked or not. Why the hell were two people in my room with a knife? Just rob the place. It's not like I would have noticed them come and go. At first, I thought whoever broke into my house that night might have known my parents were out of the country, but now I'm starting to doubt that theory, because I have trouble believing standard thieves would go out of their way to kill someone. My name is Natasha. This started happening about 3 months ago, right after I broke up with my ex Tibbet. I'm 23, and I just moved into my first solo apartment after living with roommates since college. It was nothing special, a one-bedroom in a mid-sized complex in Columbus, Ohio. I work remote, so I'm home a lot. That's part of why I wanted my own place. I was tired of trying to take calls while my roommates were being loud in the kitchen or whatever. The apartment was on the second floor, facing the back of the complex, which meant my view was basically the parking lot and then some trees. Not exactly scenic, but I didn't care. I had my own space, my own schedule, and for the first time in my adult life, actual privacy. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. I didn't really interact with anyone in the building besides the occasional head nod. There was an older woman on the first floor who always seemed to be checking her mail whenever I walked by, and a couple across the hall who I'd hear arguing sometimes through the walls. That was about the extent of my social landscape. Anyway, I started noticing this guy.
The first time was maybe 3 weeks after I moved in. I was coming back from the gym around 8 p.m., and as I was walking up the stairs to my floor, I passed someone coming down. He was this nondescript white guy, maybe late 30s or early 40s. He had an average build. He was also wearing a gray hoodie. There wasn't really anything remarkable about him. We did that awkward thing where you both try to move to the same side, then he just kind of squeezed past me without saying anything. I didn't think much of it. The second time was a few days later. I was in the parking lot getting something out of my car, and I saw him standing near the dumpsters. He wasn't really doing anything, just sort of standing there. When I looked over, he turned and walked away around the side of the building. Again, not that weird on its own. I shrugged it off and went about my business as usual. The third time is when things started feeling off. I was working at my desk, which faces the window overlooking the parking lot. It was the middle of the afternoon, and I happened to glance outside while I was on a call. There was a navy blue car parked in the lot that I didn't recognize, and someone was sitting in the driver's seat. I couldn't see their face clearly, but I could tell they were looking up at the building, at my floor, maybe at my window specifically, but I couldn't be sure. I watched for a few seconds, then went back to my call. When I looked again, maybe 10 minutes later, the car was gone. For whatever reason, that stuck with me. I started paying more attention after that, and the more attention I paid, the more I noticed him. The guy spent a lot of time in the parking lot, not every day, but often enough that it started to feel like a pattern. Sometimes he'd be walking through, sometimes sitting in that same blue car, which I realized was his a few days later. Once I saw him standing by the stairs to my building, just looking at his phone. He never looked directly at me, or if he did, I never caught him. But I started to get this feeling like he was always positioned in a way where he could see my apartment. I told myself I was being paranoid. The complex isn't that big. If someone lived there and kept similar hours to me, I'd probably see them a lot. That's just math. And I'd never actually caught him doing anything wrong either. He wasn't following me, and he wasn't approaching me. He was just around. But then something happened that I couldn't explain away. I have a pretty set routine. I go to the same gym at the same time most days, and I usually stop at this Chipotle on the way back twice a week. It's like a 15-minute drive from my apartment in a completely different part of town. One night, I'm sitting in the Chipotle eating by myself and scrolling through my phone. I look up, and there he is. That same guy with that same gray hoodie from the first time I saw him. He was just sitting at a table across the restaurant, eating a burrito bowl. I started to feel sick in my stomach, I'm not exaggerating. I felt physically sick for a second, because there was no reason he should be there. The gym I go to is in a different direction. This Chipotle isn't even near anything else. It's not like it's on a main road where you just happen to end up. You go there on purpose. I tried to rationalize it. I mean, Chipotle is pretty popular, and he was eating, but he was also looking at me. Not obviously. He looked down at his food, then glanced up, then looked down again. But I could feel it, and when I got up to leave, I swear he started gathering his stuff too. I walked to my car fast. I didn't run, but I was moving. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a second. When I looked back at the restaurant, I couldn't see him through the windows. I don't know if he came outside or not, but I didn't want to stick around. The drive home, I kept checking the mirrors. I didn't see anyone following me, but I took a weird route just to be safe. It was probably overkill, especially because he already knew where my apartment was, but I wasn't thinking straight. When I got back to my apartment, I sat in the dark for like an hour just watching the parking lot through my window. I never saw either him or that sedan. So eventually, I convinced myself I'd overreacted and went to bed. The next morning, though, I woke up and looked outside like I'd been doing every morning since this started. The sedan was there, and I could see someone sitting in it, so I didn't think twice and just called the police. I felt stupid doing it. What was I gonna say? Something along the lines of, there's a guy who I keep seeing and it's making me uncomfortable. As silly as it sounded, I called anyway, and I tried to explain the situation. The officer I talked to was polite, but clearly thought I was being paranoid. He said they could send someone to check the parking lot, but unless the person was doing something illegal, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested I document things, write down dates and times, take pictures if I could, and call back if anything escalated. By the time a patrol car actually showed up, maybe 45 minutes later, the sedan was gone. The officer walked around the complex, knocked on a few doors, and basically told me what I expected. No sign of anyone suspicious, no complaints from other residents. He gave me a card and told me to call if anything else happened. Nothing happened for about a week after that. I started to relax a little. I figured maybe the police visits had spooked that creep, or maybe I really had been imagining things and my brain just needed to reset. But then I got the note. It was slipped under my door sometime during the night, and I found it in the morning when I woke up. It was a handwritten note that read, "You should really close your blinds at night." I was terrified. I remember dropping the note out of fear before scrambling to pick it back up. My hands were shaking, and I felt a really nasty feeling of danger and helplessness. I ended up moving out 2 weeks later. I didn't even wait for my lease to end. I just paid the penalty and left. I thought that was the end of it. I moved back in with my parents, planning to stay there until I found another apartment. But if that was really the end of it, I probably wouldn't be writing this. About a month after moving back home, I was driving back from the gym. A different gym, obviously, one near my parents' place. And that's when I saw it. A navy blue sedan parked on a random side street maybe 2 blocks from my parents' neighborhood. I immediately recognized the car, and I knew it was the same car. I knew it for a fact. I sped the rest of the way home, trying not to freak out. I didn't see anyone following me, but that almost made it worse, because if it was him, and I'm almost positive it was, then he probably already knew where I was going. I told my parents as soon as I got inside. My dad said he'd keep an eye out, and my mom started double-checking all the locks. They've been watching the street more carefully since then, and my dad even mentioned getting a camera for the front porch. It's been about 2 weeks, and I haven't seen that car since. Part of me wants to believe it was a coincidence, that it was just a similar car and I'm losing my mind, but I know what I saw. I don't even know how he found me, but I really don't want to think about the possibility that I have a dedicated stalker who's been tracking everything I do. I'm quite honestly scared to do anything that involves leaving the house. I'm debating getting the police involved again, but there's not much I'd be able to even tell them. Hopefully this story needs no updates. I unfortunately had to move back with my family after my most recent breakup. He and I were living in Boston together in an apartment we got. Just a little word of advice: never sign a lease with someone who you recently got into a relationship with. He was not the person I thought he was. My parents live in western Massachusetts. If you've ever been to Massachusetts, you'd know the more west you get, typically the more rural it gets. I'm not a big country girl. I like to be in or near a major city, especially since I'm in my 20s still. My parents' area is super boring. I'm hoping I'm only here temporarily until I find another apartment I can afford myself, though I'll be staying away from Boston for reasons. I had to get a job back at the urgent care facility I used to work at before I moved. They welcomed me back excitedly, even if it is just temporarily until I move again. The trade-off with this job, though, is that I tend to work undesirable hours, meaning overnights. Though the shifts are easy, they're boring, and they entirely mess up my sleep schedule and social life. Not that social life is even the best around here. After my shifts, sometimes I'll stop for what's considered my dinner, usually takeout since not much is open at these hours. Though this morning, I got out at 4 a.m., and there's a bagel place that opens at that time, and they serve a lot of types of food. So I stopped by there and grabbed a chicken sandwich and a salad. I was going to eat it once I got home. I also had to make a pit stop for gas as well. I stopped at the local Shell station, one of the few gas stations open at this hour that was on the way home. The parking lot for this station is huge, and yet I hardly ever see any other cars in there, even during the day. I went inside to pay cash to save a little money. I went back outside to the pump, and there was now another car at one of the other pumps. It was a blue sedan. A guy got out of the car as I was walking over to the pump I was at. As I began fueling, I noticed him start to fuel up as well. I guess he locked the handle in place so that it would automatically keep dispensing gas without him holding it, because he walked through the 2 pumps to my side, and then said to me, "Want to see a funny trick?" I immediately hated this interaction. Still, for some reason, I said, "What's the trick?" He then started doing that stupid old trick where you pretend you're pulling your finger off with your other hand by just folding it down. He kept looking down at his hands and then back at me with this kind of sarcastic looking expression, as if he knew what he was doing was stupid, but honestly I couldn't tell. I fake laughed so that he'd go away, but he didn't stop. He kept doing the trick even after I looked away and tried my best to pretend not to notice anymore. When I felt the click of the gas nozzle indicating that the tank was full, I was so relieved. I quickly relatched the nozzle to the pump and hurried inside for my change. When I came back outside, the man wasn't in sight anymore, yet his car was still there, and the hose was still pumping gas into his car. I didn't want to stick around to catch his attention again. I got back in my car, though just out of paranoia, I checked the back seats just to make sure he wasn't hiding back there. I locked the doors, and then I was back on the road. I was home in about 5 minutes after that. I was so excited to eat my 4:30 a.m. dinner. I picked up the spare from my parents' hiding spot, unlocked the door, and then quickly hid it back in its hiding spot. I locked the door once I entered, as I always do. I went straight to the kitchen to eat. I make sure to be quiet when I get home late so as not to wake up my parents. We only have 2 cars in the family, so I share my mom's car. I didn't need a car in Boston anyway, but since I moved back, I had just been using the hidden spare key they would hide in the front to let myself in. As I was at the table eating, I heard the front door being unlocked and then opening and closing. I stopped chewing and froze to listen. With a mouth full of food, I said, "Mom? Dad?" No answer. I didn't hear any footsteps or anything. I hurried out of the kitchen to take a peek in the foyer. No one was in there. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I ran up the stairs to my parents' room and barged in. I was horrified to see both my parents in bed, and they were both awoken to my very forceful opening of the door. I said very quietly but in a clear panic that someone just came inside the house. My dad jumped out of bed and hurried downstairs. I cautiously followed behind him. He turned on all the lights of every room we passed, then he went out front to check for the spare key, and it was missing. My mom and I were absolutely horrified, yet my mom still found the time to lecture me for not checking my surroundings before re-hiding the key. My dad began searching every room in the house, and we followed. When he was done checking my older brother's room, he left to continue searching and left the lights on in here. I stayed behind in this room and decided to check a couple of the spots that I felt my dad had missed, because I know internally I didn't expect to find anyone. I checked under the bed, and then I checked the closets. Nothing. So I went downstairs to the main floor. It seemed my dad was already checking the basement. I was honestly horrified to go into the basement right now, even with my dad down there, so I stayed on the middle floor with my mom. But curiosity still got me, and I went to the dining room, which is adjacent to the foyer by the front door. I got down on my knees and looked under the table, and there he was. It truly did not feel real. There was that man from the gas station, hiding under the dining room table. I recognized him instantly. I screamed as loud as I could, and in response, my mom started to scream too. My 65-year-old dad came up the stairs as fast as he could, ready to fight this intruder. The man came out from under the table and began fending off my dad, who is at least 20 years his senior. And as my mom and I saw him overpowering my dad, we began doing whatever we could as well, hitting and punching at the man as my dad still held on to him. It was when all 3 of us were attacking him that he finally decided to retreat and fled through the front door. This was when we called the cops, and thank God for a quick response time. However, that man still had the key to the front door. That night, the police left a police car parked in our driveway to deter that man from coming back. My dad wedged a chair in front of the front door as well and slept in the living room. The next day, he switched out the lock to the front door, and with that, my parents' days of hiding a key outside were over. I do feel guilty for bringing that dangerous man to my parents' house, and it was definitely on me for being careless. But honestly, I think that man followed me with his headlights off, because I didn't see any cars behind me the entire ride home. I'm happy for my and my family's safety though. However, this just made me want to move out of here even more.
I like driving at night because there's nothing more that I hate than driving in traffic. I'm from New York, Long Island specifically, and the traffic here is truly unbearable. My brother lives in Florida, and I like to go down and visit pretty often. It's a long drive though. Depending on when you leave, it could be upwards of 18 hours. I like to leave New York very early in the morning, like 2 a.m., so that I could be out of all the high traffic areas by the time any cars are on the road. So it was a Thursday morning at 2 a.m. that I was leaving home to get on the road. I stopped for my morning coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, knowing I had a long, grueling drive ahead of me. The reason I was driving and not flying was because I was going to be down there for a whole month, and I didn't want to rely on my brother to take me everywhere I needed to go. By the time I was off of Long Island, it was after 3 a.m. It was smooth sailing from Jersey. The drive from New York to Florida is very easy once you're out of New York. You take the I-95 all the way down. At about 4 a.m., the hunger was starting to set in, and so I pulled off the I-95 at the first sight of a food sign. I saw Wendy's on the sign, and so I figured I'd get breakfast from there. I skipped breakfast at the house because waking up so early, I feel like your brain doesn't have a chance to realize how hungry you are for a few hours. At least that's me personally. I followed the signs to the Wendy's. I was in some random spot in Jersey. There were no streetlights here. I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. Just about the only light was from my headlights. When I got to the Wendy's parking lot, some of the lights were on, and I saw a car in the parking lot, so I pulled into the drive-thru. The menu in the drive-thru was lit up, so I thought it was open, but I sat there for over a minute looking at the intercom, waiting for someone to greet me, but they didn't. I even said excuse me to no avail. I pulled out my phone and looked up this Wendy's, and wouldn't you know it, it didn't open until 6 a.m. And then, suddenly, 3 knocks at my window almost sent me out of my seat. I turned to my right, and there was a man outside my window, smiling. He motioned for me to lower the window. I didn't really feel comfortable doing that, so I just cracked it open just enough to hear him. He said the place isn't open, and I said, yeah, I actually just found that out. He then told me that he was stranded. He pointed to the one other car in the parking lot over there, and said his battery died. He practically begged me to come help him jumpstart his car. I told him I don't have jumper cables, and he told me not to worry, he has them in his trunk. I took one more look at his car parked in the corner spot by the woods, and I said okay. I believe in karma, and I knew I'd have bad karma if I left this man stranded in a situation that I could have easily helped him out in. He backed away from the car so I could pull my car next to his. Since he was parked head in, I did the same to align our hoods as close as possible. I got out from my car after popping my hood. He went to go pop his hood and grab his jumper cables. After we connected the cables to the respective terminals, I started my car again. We gave it a minute before I told him he should go try starting his car. He took his sweet time walking inside, but when he tried starting it, the car didn't start. So we gave it another couple of minutes, and then he tried it again. Still nothing. This was weird considering he had just been driving the car, so his battery shouldn't need that long to get enough of a charge to start again. The guy then asked me to hang on as he walked away and got on his phone. He started speaking in Spanish in a pretty low volume. I can't really understand Spanish, so I wasn't even bothering trying to hear what he was saying. He came back to me after his call and said that his friend said to give it a few more minutes and try one more time. I said okay. I was trying to do the right thing, but I was also hoping this wasn't going to eat up much more of my time. But the last thing I was expecting was hearing the aggressive sound of 2 pickup truck engines flooring it into the parking lot, one from either side of the building. I instantly put it together. I said oh shit under my breath as I removed the jumper cables from my battery and shut the hood in a hurry, but it was too late. The 2 trucks pulled up behind my car, trapping me in. I had to think on my feet. I looked at the man, who was still smiling at me, but now the smile looked and felt much more nefarious and evil. The look he gave me was so unsettling, and it's engraved into my memory. I locked my car with my key fob and darted into the woods. I ran in the dark, cutting up my shins and God knows what. I tripped over something on the ground, and at that point, I took that as the time to lay down and make myself as tiny as possible. I heard a few men yelling in Spanish somewhere in the woods. I was so scared for my life as the voices got closer. I don't think it gets any more tense than what I was experiencing in that moment. I didn't know how many there were, I didn't know if they were armed, but I heard at least 3 voices. And then the voices started fading away back into the distance, and I felt a sense of relief, until the sound of my car alarm going off in the distance. All of my stuff was packed in the back of my car, hundreds of dollars worth of clothes, shoes, watches, bracelets. I started making my way back to the parking lot, crouching down. By the time I got close enough to look into the lot, I could see it was just my car there. All 3 other vehicles were gone. I ran out to my car, and it was anyone's worst nightmare. My rear window was shattered, and all of my stuff was gone. Basically 80% of my entire wardrobe, just stolen. My suitcase in the trunk, and all the bags in the back seats. Everything. I actually started to shed tears out of pure stress. I called the police and explained everything. The officers on scene told me they would have to get the CCTV footage from the Wendy's when they opened. After taking all of my info, I was told I didn't need to stay in town and they would be in touch. I was about 2 hours from home. I turned around and drove home. It was the most stressful, depressing, and defeated drive of my life. To make matters worse, I was contacted by the police department in Jersey, and they told me the vehicle in the Wendy's lot had a fake license plate, and the 2 pickup trucks didn't have plates. He told me they were still going to do what they can, but I knew that was just him trying to give me a sense of hope. My stuff was never found. Those bastards got away with it. Like I said, I believe in karma, and I hope those pieces of filth got what was coming to them. We've all taken a long car trip, haven't we? We've all passed that rest area sign multiple times, wondering if we could make it another 20 minutes or not before having to take a pee break or stretch. Sometimes you're lucky and get one of those huge rest areas with the big buildings with food and everything. But most other times, depending on where you are, you'll be lucky to get a little one with a tiny building just for restrooms and nothing else. Well, I was on a long road trip. A 15-hour road trip, actually. And a big chunk of that drive was overnight. I won't say from where to where because I don't really think that matters much. But I will say that I was in some bumfucky area on the east coast of the US. It was late at night and I was powering through the drive. Not many cars on the road at this hour. In fact, it was a pretty rare scene to see another car on the road this late. I was reaching that uncomfortable point in the ride where I had to use the bathroom, and I was just getting overall antsy in my seat from sitting for so long. I started keeping an eye out for a rest area sign, and when I saw that familiar blue sign, it felt like a saving grace. So a few miles later, I veered off into the rest area. It was a small one, but there was a restroom building and that's all I needed. There were no trucks parked here. I'm pretty sure they can only stay overnight at designated truck rest areas. But there was another car in the parking lot. I considered the possibility that whoever it was asleep in their car. As I got out from my car, I stretched a bit, and on my way to the bathroom, I looked at the other car in the lot, but the windows appeared to be tinted, so I couldn't see if someone was inside of it or not. Not that it was a big deal in the moment, I was just curious. I got inside the bathroom, and I was faced with a strange sight. There was a man standing in the corner of the bathroom with his head looking down and his back towards me. At first I thought he was using the urinal, but I quickly realized he wasn't even facing the closest urinal. He was literally just facing the corner of the wall. I paused, and I didn't know whether to say something or not. I almost said, "Are you alright?" but the scene was just too weird. I had to walk closer to him though to get to the stall, and honestly, I was almost scared to get near him. I just tried to mind my business and keep a normal pace. I walked into the stall and closed the door. Honestly though, I couldn't go to the bathroom with someone else in the room. I'm one of those people. He was just too dead silent in there. It was weird. I stood in the stall for like a minute trying to at least pee, but I couldn't for some reason. I flushed the toilet anyway and left the stall. But now, the man had turned around. He was still standing in the same spot, but now he was facing me. I could see his face, and he was looking at me. I'm not one to ever judge someone's appearance, but this man was the scariest looking man I'd ever seen. There was something so unsettling about his face, specifically his eye region. The expression he had was a blank stare. I hadn't had a social interaction in over 10 hours, and this caught me way off guard. Instead of saying anything, I quickly turned and headed out of the bathroom. I got to my car and wasted no time turning it on and backing it up. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw that man walking in the direction of my car. I drove fast away to get him out of my sight. I was relieved to get back on the highway. However, that was the only relief I got. I still had to use the bathroom. I was sure it would only be another 20 minutes or so till the next one. I could hold it. I was right, it was about 20 minutes before I got to the next rest area. It was another nearly identical one as the other. Like I said earlier, most are pretty similar. No cars were in this one, thank God. I pulled into a spot right in front of the bathroom and hurried to the stall, and let's just say I felt a lot better very quickly. As I was finishing up in the stall, I heard footsteps enter the room. I thought they'd stop at one of the urinals, but the footsteps came straight to the stall and stopped. I saw someone's shoes through the bottom crack of the door. They were literally standing on the other side of the stall. My first thought was that it was that guy from the other bathroom. He followed me. My social anxiety was handicapping me from saying anything initially, until I finally mustered up the courage to say, "Someone's in here." No response to this though. Now I knew I was in trouble. The only thing I could do was dial 911, put it on speaker so that the man could hear the operator say, "911, what's your emergency?" I said loud and clear, "I'm being followed by a dangerous man. I feel threatened." As the operator asked my location and details, I answered everything in a loud voice, in a tone suggesting that I was implying a "f*** you" to the man. Thank God this worked, as the person turned and walked out of the bathroom. I told this to the operator, but said I still would feel safer waiting in here until police came, and that's what I did. A knock at the bathroom door from a police officer was my cue to safely come out. I described the man and the vehicle I saw at the other rest area, the creepy encounter, and then the second creepy encounter at this one. We checked my car as well to make sure it wasn't messed with at all. After determining that he was gone, the officer and I left the rest area at the same time, and eventually he turned off the highway. The rest of my road trip went normal, but damn was this a terrifying night. I'd never been followed before. I know with almost 100% certainty that the person outside of the stall was the same creep that was in the first bathroom. It just feels extra weird because I'm a male. These things I feel like usually seem to happen to women, but I guess it can really happen to anyone. What I'm about to tell you is one of the last memories I can still remember from middle school, and not for a good reason. I'd argue that it was the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to me. When I was in middle school, I didn't have a lot of friends. The friends I did have were all a little odd, but then again, so was I. We spent a lot of time together and enjoyed a lot of the same things. There was Greg, Jay, Mark, and myself. We were inseparable. Back then, it seemed like the four of us would last forever. Looking back though, it was pretty clear that Jay and I were beginning to distance ourselves from Mark and Greg, but that's neither here nor there. One summer, Greg invited the three of us on a week-long trip to Maine. Greg's family had a summer home up in Maine on one of the little islands in Casco Bay. To be completely honest, his family was really secretive about the place, and none of us even knew it existed until he invited us there. His family was strange in general, but that's a story for another time. The drive was long and uncomfortable. I had a runny nose and was sneezing the entire time, which I could tell was really pissing off Greg's dad. He was one of those over-the-top germaphobes, and I got really uncomfortable anytime he'd look at me. Mark and I were also bickering about something stupid, but the two of us tended to get into that a lot. We had to drive the car onto a ferry in order to make it to the island. That part was actually really fun. The house was small but pretty. I remember feeling detached from reality in that house. I can't really explain it. It was like a whole other world on that island. I still feel like it would be easy for a person to get lost in that house, if that makes any sense. The island had a really dreamy feel. Everyone knew each other, and random people on the street would recognize and say hello to Greg when they saw him. We spent most of our time biking around, and
an activity that never got boring at our age. I'll skip the boring stuff. I don't remember all of it anyway. The second day of the trip, I couldn't find my Barcelona snapback cap anywhere. I was really upset since I was a huge soccer fan, and it was one of the only pieces of merch I had. Greg said he thought I left it on the beach, but I was almost certain I had brought it back. I remember crying to Greg's dad, who basically told me to get over it and not let something small ruin the trip, so that's what I did. The next day, after a long day of biking around, I realized one of my pens was missing. I had a pen collection at that time, which I brought everywhere. Like I said, weird kid. I couldn't remember whether or not I had taken that specific pen out of my case, but Jay said he remembered seeing me holding it on my bike. I was devastated. To me, losing a pen was the equivalent of losing a limb. That's how serious I was about them. I refused to cry again in front of Greg's dad, so I claimed I wasn't feeling well and opted to spend the rest of the evening in bed. I ended up falling asleep really early because of that, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when I woke up at 3 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. I was rolling around trying to fall back asleep when I picked up on something. I froze for a few seconds to confirm what I was hearing. Someone was whispering, almost inaudibly. I had to focus really hard to even hear it. Was I dreaming? There was no shot. I tried as best as possible to make out what they were saying, but couldn't understand a single word. It sounded like it was coming from Mark's bed, the top bunk across the room from me, but I couldn't be certain. I waited a few minutes, but the whispering continued. For some reason, I was scared to say anything or reveal that I was awake. Eventually, I blocked the whispering out of my mind and fell asleep. The next morning, I tried to forget about what had happened the night before. I debated asking my friends which of them had been doing it, but decided against it. We were playing some dumb game in the yard when Mark said he had to use the bathroom. He was gone a while, but that was typical for Mark. He took a lot of time to do everything. Eventually, I shot a glance back at the house and had to do a double take. In one of the second floor windows was Mark, staring blankly out at us. I figured he was in the bathroom, but that's when it hit me. Greg's house didn't have a second floor bathroom. I turned to see if either Greg or Jay noticed, but neither of them were looking. When I turned to look back at the house, Mark was gone. Greg's dad was planning on taking us to dinner that night, but I didn't want to go. I pretended to be sick again and told him I wanted to nap instead. He said that was fine and told me he'd bring me back something. As I was lying in bed, I realized there was no way I was going to fall asleep. I started thinking things over in my head. I just couldn't get over how weird it was that Mark was watching all of us from the house, and the whispering was even creepier. I'm not sure what compelled me to do it, but I got out of bed and started snooping around Mark's bunk. My jaw basically hit the floor when I found my Barcelona cap in his duffel bag. I dug around some more and found a bunch of my personal belongings that I didn't even know were missing. There was a nail clipper my mom had packed for me in there, along with my extra toothbrush, and, most disturbingly, a pair of my underwear. I didn't know what to think. I was about to cry when I noticed something else in the bag. His notebook. Sometimes, even to this day, I still regret picking up that notebook. My middle school brain was not prepared for what was in there. It was completely filled with drawings, pencil drawings, some sketched so aggressively that there were holes in some of the pages. There were drawings of monsters, creatures, and things out of nightmares. There were really disturbing acts of violence drawn in there. People getting run over by cars, stabbed, mutilated, tortured. It was sick. Worse than sick, it was demonic. There was honest-to-God demonic shit in there. There were drawings of me in there. The image that was never and will never leave my brain is a drawing of me on a cross with my legs missing. The last few pages were basically all of me, and one of the pages was just my name, scribbled 100 times. It makes me sick thinking about everything I saw in there, and there's stuff I haven't even mentioned. The last page was the worst. My name was at the top of the page in big letters, and below it were 4 words I'll never forget. I'll do it tomorrow. When everyone got back home, I got Greg's dad alone and told him about what was going on in a low voice while my friend started a movie in the living room. He didn't believe me until I showed him Mark's notebook, which I could tell he found equally disturbing. He didn't know what to do. He told me to put everything back the way I found it. I didn't want to, but he was the adult, and I couldn't tell him no.
As I was putting the notebook back, I made a split-second decision and tore one of the pages out. Meanwhile, Greg's dad then ran out to the living room and told everyone there was a family emergency and that we had to end the trip early. As we were frantically packing our things, I could feel Mark's eyes burning a hole in my back. I was scared to look at him. We pulled out of the driveway, caught the first ferry off the island, and drove the whole way back without stopping once. Greg's dad dropped Mark off first, then James. James and Greg lived on the same street, so he let Greg out of the car with James. As we were driving to my house, Greg's dad told me that he'd talked to Mark's parents, and that it was best that I not mention anything to my parents. Greg and Mark's families were really close, so I guess that made sense. When I got home though, I couldn't last 10 minutes. I broke down crying to my parents and told them everything. They were furious and called the police in the same minute. My parents were also outraged that Greg's dad would try to sweep something so serious under the rug. Things get a little fuzzy after that. I remember crying again while telling the police what happened. When they asked for proof, I was able to show them the page I ripped out of Mark's notebook. Apparently, that was enough. The police obtained a warrant and actually found the notebook. My items were all returned except for my pen, which the police were never able to find. My parents didn't tell me much about how things went, but I never saw Mark again. His family moved, and he never showed up to school again. I never hung out with Greg again either. The reason I'm writing this now is because last week, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. It said I remember everything, and wrapped inside the envelope was the pen Mark had stolen from me all those years ago. I have no idea how he found my address or why it's taken him so long to reach out. I'm honestly considering switching apartments. If anyone has any advice about my situation, I'd greatly appreciate it. This story is fresh in my mind since it literally happened last week as I'm writing this. My extended family is odd. I won't get into it, but basically everyone is either a gun nut, avid hunter, or both. Most families go on vacation in the summer. Mine tends to go around winter time. We don't go on typical vacations though. Every season, the adults chip in and rent a house for a week in some random location, usually in the woods. This time around it was a cabin in Vermont. I say cabin, but it was more like a castle. It had to be to accommodate all of us. Now comes the strange part. We play a lot of weird games as a family. Most of them involve shooting to some capacity. Here's the weirdest one. On the second to last night, all the adults gear up in warm clothing and venture outside into the woods for a massive game of laser tag. I know how ridiculous this sounds, believe me. I'm no stranger to people walking out of my life because of my family. The winner every year gets to claim a pretty decent prize pot and a ton of bragging rights. Plus, we played with this really cool industrial-grade set my uncle Lucian made. He was the most gung-ho about this whole thing. The rules were simple. It was every man for himself, and the last person tagged won. If there were multiple people left by midnight, the prize was split. Once you got tagged, you made your way to the fire pit outside the house. Once the second to last person made it back, everyone would fire rounds into the air to let the last person left know they had won. I had just turned 18, so this was literally my first time being allowed to play. I'd be lying if I told you I wasn't psyched to play, not even for the money, but just because it seemed fun. As we were about to make our way outside, Lucian made sure we all knew how the equipment worked and where to keep our markers so the game would be fair. Then he told all of us to set a 10-minute timer on our phones so we'd know when to begin. Then, without warning, he turned and sprinted into the woods, like he was running a track race. My relatives followed suit, spreading in all directions. I noticed that most of them had run uphill, so I figured going downhill would give me a better shot at lasting longer. It was dark, but the snow on the ground made things pretty visible. I can't remember how many of us were playing, but it was a lot. At least 10 of my cousins and a couple sets of parents, including mine. Our family's pretty huge. After venturing deep into the forest, I found a little perch where I could see decently far up the hill, so I figured I'd wait there and catch my breath. I sat there for a decent while, trying to think of what to do. I figured if I kept walking adjacent to the slope, I could eventually work my way upwards and maybe flank whoever was still up there, so that's what I did. I must have walked along the slope to the left for 15 minutes straight, putting as much distance between me and the house as possible. Time really wasn't an issue, as there were still about 2 hours until midnight. I started walking up the slope. Just then, I heard a very faint crunching sound over my left shoulder, in the direction facing opposite my uncle's house. I jumped behind the nearest tree, praying whoever it was couldn't get a clean shot off. After a few seconds, I looked in the direction of the sound, but didn't see anything. And then, after straining my eyes, I saw it. A very faint, almost unnoticeable trail of footprints way off in the distance. They led to a thick tree about 15 yards behind me. There was someone standing behind that tree. I was positive of it. And then it hit me. Why hadn't they just tagged me? I was clearly out in the open, oblivious to their presence, and they were clearly trying to sneak up on me. I started running up the hill, hoping to get out of range before they could get a shot off. I was just about to continue back to the right towards the house when I noticed something. Further off to the left was another set of footprints. This one was weird though. It started from deeper in the woods, came towards me, and looped back into the forest. Had someone been outflanking even me? They would have had to walk further into the woods than I had, which I found pretty hard to believe. Before I could keep thinking, I heard something from the slope I had just run up. It sounded like a person falling into the snow. I continued running, this time back toward the house. I pulled out my phone. It was past 11. I couldn't believe an hour had already gone by. I kept running and stumbled upon a path of footprints heading towards the house. They looked fresh, so I picked up the speed, hoping to catch someone off guard. I passed a line of trees and saw my cousin Corbo walking at a steady pace, laser gun in hand. I crouched and pulled out my pistol. I nailed his marker and it started blinking. He slammed his fist against a tree before shaking his head and continuing towards the house. I grinned, thrilled to have actually gotten a kill. High on the adrenaline, I decided to hatch a plan to get the jump on the person stalking me. I sprinted ahead for another minute, then doubled back until I could safely jump behind a tree without leaving an obvious trail. It was flawless. There was no way anyone following my footprints would know I was hiding there. As I was waiting there, my marker started blinking out of nowhere. I was pissed. The beam was coming from where I had just been. It was definitely whoever was stalking me. I stood up, expecting whoever had just shot me to turn their laser off. They didn't though. The beam stayed trained on me, which actually started to get on my nerves. It felt like they were taunting me. I wanted to know who had been behind me that whole time, so I started walking in the direction of the beam. They never stopped shining their laser at me, even as I began closing in. All I could see were their hands. The rest of their body was standing behind a tree. Just then, I heard a bunch of gunshots sound off behind me, making me jump. I froze. Impossible. I must have won. Corbo must have been the final kill. But then who in the world killed me? I kept staring at the thin beam of light that was still pointing at me, and then the person holding the laser gun stepped out from behind the tree. It was a stranger. Even worse, there were two of them, standing side by side. Just then, I heard a crunch from behind me. I whipped my head around to see a man in a ski mask holding a trash bag in one hand and a knife in the other. He noticed me staring at him and started sprinting toward me. I ran, ditching my gear and screaming at the top of my lungs. I could hear all three of them chasing me, yelling things that I didn't even think were English. I zipped past the trees and ran as fast as I could through the snow, praying to God I didn't trip. They were gaining on me. I didn't want to turn around, but I knew they were right on my heels. Finally, I could see the lights of the house in the distance. I kept screaming and running, feeling my legs starting to give out. I was so close to the clearing, and that's when I saw Lucian sprinting toward me, hunting rifle in hand. He aimed above my head and fired 3 shots into the air. I heard whoever was behind me trip before running back into the woods. I collapsed at Lucian's feet, desperate for air. I literally passed out from exhaustion right there in the snow. The next morning was rough. My aunt explained that she had tripped at one point during the game and later realized she had dropped her laser gun, which explained how the guys in the woods had one. Corbo had tagged 6 of my relatives before I found him, which is why he was so upset when I got him. It turned out that he was in fact the last kill. Lucian and my dad had run out into the woods with their guns, but couldn't find a thing. They tried following the footprints, but there were so many branching paths and dead ends they eventually gave up. That whole day was a blur. The adults contacted the owners of the house, and we also reported everything to the police. The next morning, I woke up to yelling coming from downstairs. Lucian was losing it, yelling toward the woods at the top of his lungs.
I ran down to find a single snowman facing the house. In its hand was the laser gun my aunt had dropped. Lucian fired a few rounds into the snowman's head before shouting some more threats and storming inside. It's only been about a week, but I'll send an update if I hear anything. When I was in college, I couldn't afford the extravagant spring break vacations to Mexico that all the Greek life people went on. Because of this, I spent my first 3 spring breaks on campus, which I actually didn't mind too much. By the time spring break rolled around my senior year, though, I realized that it was basically my last chance to get the spring break experience I'd been missing out on. Mexico was still out of the question since I'd still be paying everything myself. Eventually, my girlfriend Allie found a decently priced Airbnb that sounded pretty appealing. We figured we could turn it into a couple's getaway of sorts, so we invited her best friend Laya and her boyfriend Calvin. We were all super excited since we had never been on a vacation together before. The place we had picked wasn't your typical spring break Airbnb though. It was nestled in a really secluded woodsy area in Lake County, California. There was a hot tub, an exposed fireplace, an antique-style record player, and some cots for stargazing outside. It was honestly perfect. The place was about 2.5 hours away, so we'd get a nice and relaxing drive on the way. Unfortunately, Calvin drove a really cramped Mini Cooper, meaning the girls had to squeeze into the back seat. He was honestly pretty insecure about his car and would get annoyed when one of us would make a comment about it, which was a pretty funny detail. As terrible as that car was, it was a drop top, which was really nice. We pulled in around 8 p.m. after it was already fully dark out. I can't even lie, the place looked a little scary late at night with all the lights off. When I say it was in the woods, I mean it. The trees blocked the view of all but one of the neighboring houses. The first night was really chill. We hung by the fireplace with a bottle of wine and played some board games. We wanted to go in the hot tub, but Calvin was complaining, so we didn't. He was honestly being pretty pouty for some reason, but we all just assumed there was something on his mind. The next night was better. We convinced Calvin to join us in the hot tub for some drinking games. The hot tub was connected to the back of the house, but inside its own little room, the walls of which were just screens. We were playing Never Have I Ever with some music blasting, having a lot of fun. We were all more than a little buzzed at that point. And just then, though, a flash of bright light lit up the spa room. If it had been raining, we would have assumed it was lightning, that's how bright it was. I quickly turned the music off, and the 4 of us stared at each other, nervous to say anything. I quietly got out of the hot tub and made my way from the spa room to the back deck. I looked out into the woods, but it was too dark to see anything. Out of nowhere, I started hearing a clicking sound coming from the woods. A few seconds later, I heard another one from a different direction, and then a whistling sound started up. The sounds kept coming, clicking and whistling from too many directions to keep track of. I yelled for Calvin and the girls to run inside, and I followed them into the house. The 4 of us huddled in the living room, not sure of what to do. I thought maybe it was a dumb prank or someone messing with us, which is why we didn't call the police right away. A few minutes later, though, someone started banging on the front door. The girls were hysterical, so I told Calvin to call the police while I grabbed the biggest knife in the kitchen, ready to protect everyone should it come to that. I yelled in a deep voice that I had a gun, which was obviously just a bluff. The banging stopped. Calvin said the police were on the way, but out there in the middle of nowhere, they could have been miles from us. We waited in silence for a few minutes. It was the tensest moment of my life. Just when we thought the nightmare was over, one of the living room windows shattered. Someone had thrown a massive rock through it. The girls screamed, and I told everyone to run upstairs and lock the door. I stayed downstairs, bracing myself for a fight. By some miracle, no one came charging through the window. Eventually, I ran over to inspect the window and noticed there was a piece of paper taped to the rock that had been thrown. Scribbled in black ink were the words, "Go away, you shouldn't be here." The police arrived shortly after and did a thorough search of the property. They of course found nothing. We weren't sticking around to wait for them though. We were packed up and out of there that night. The Airbnb hosts actually ended up giving us a refund, although they refused to talk about the situation. My girlfriend thinks there's something the owner wasn't telling us. Maybe she's right. I guess that could explain why the place was so cheap. Either way, I don't think I'll be taking any vacations or using Airbnb anytime soon.
I've been dating my girlfriend for 3 years now. I'll nickname her Nikki. It started innocently enough that I commented on one of her Instagram stories and we started chatting from there. Eventually I got her number and then Snapchat, and after a week we met in person. We started hanging out right after the holidays in January, and the thought of Valentine's Day was already coming up. It was nice having started talking to a girl around that time so that I wouldn't feel the dread of being alone on that annoying holiday. But as Valentine's Day approached and Nikki and I were a few dates in, she confided in me about a stalker situation she'd been dealing with. The man's name is Ben, and he's a guy a few years older than Nikki who happened to go to the same commuter college as her, met her in class for a group project, and followed her around campus a few times. She never involved police or anything, shockingly. Hearing that this guy found out where she lived, sent her a bunch of creepy texts which she ignored. She said she never blocked the number because she wanted to see how far he would go without getting the hints. When I gauged why she was choosing now to bring this to my attention, she said because he started reaching out to her again, specifically for Valentine's Day. As you can see here, he started ramping up the texting again as Valentine's Day approached. She continued to just ignore it and let the texts pile up, but he brought it to the next level when he left a box of Russell Stover chocolates on her doorstep. She knew it was from him because he texted her, "I hope you like the gift I left you." This was when she decided to put an end to it, and replied to him a long message which I won't share for her privacy, but in short, she said he needs help, and that she's seeing someone now, so to leave her alone. There are a number of ways to get someone's address this day and age, but she was scared that he got it by following her home one day. I did my best to make sure that she knew I wouldn't let him do anything to her. Well, fast forward maybe a few days, and Nikki sent me a concerning screenshot. It was a screenshot of some text from a fake number, asking if the guy she was seeing was me. Me as in, he wrote my name. Now I felt involved, and that made me feel moderately uncomfortable. To this point, all I've heard of this guy was that he was a very creepy and overly persistent texter, and potentially followed the girl I'm seeing home to her house. And now he's texting her on fake numbers, bringing up my name. It was reaching the point where Nikki was close to calling the police if this didn't stop. I told her I'd go to the police station with her if he reached out one more time. Fast forward to Valentine's Day. It was on a Friday this year. Nikki and I went out to eat at a nice restaurant that sat on the water. We were at an outside table because the weather was nice. As we ate, we both took notice to a guy sitting on a bench outside of the dining area by the parking lot with a hat conspicuously pulled down his face as if he were hiding. Nikki made a joke, "What if that's Ben?" We laughed, but then he slightly tilted his head in our direction as we were looking at him, and then he quickly looked away, and seconds later he got up and walked away. We weren't laughing anymore. Now we actually questioned the chances of that actually being him, but after a few minutes, the conversation shifted to something else, and we enjoyed the rest of our time there. Afterwards, we wanted to keep hanging out. It was Valentine's Day after all, but her parents were home. I had the place to myself, so we went together back to my rental house. We were on the couch, and things were getting a bit more intimate. That's when Nikki pulled away from me and said, "What was that?" I heard it too. Something from outside in the backyard. "Want me to go check?" I asked. She nodded her head. I went out to the backyard patio, expecting to hear some animals scurrying off in reaction to my presence. I slipped on my slides and walked around the yard, looking around for anything that could have fallen over, and I found what made the noise. The entire stack of beach chairs that was leaning on the house had been knocked over. I don't know how that would happen unless someone or something bumped into them. There wasn't even the slightest breeze that night. I looked around at the bushes that encompassed our yard, and then, as if my brain immediately could spot something out of place, I locked in my vision on something tall in the bushes. My neck jutted forward as I literally tried to focus in and get a better look at what I was looking at. I stepped forward a few steps. I had an oh shit moment when I realized it was someone standing in the bushes. He had seen me notice him by this point. I said, "Who is that?" And the guy started quickly coming out from the bushes, in a quick enough speed that I took it as a threat, as if he were about to charge at me. I took the chance to get him on the ground when he was still struggling with the bushes and twigs, and I yelled at him to stay down multiple times. I yelled Nikki's name until she came outside, and I said call the police. The guy on the ground struggled and tried to get loose a few times, but I more or less had him in a steady hold. When Nikki came outside while talking with the police, I asked her if this was the guy. She gasped and said, "Oh my God, yes." It was the Ben guy who had been harassing her. What's worse is at that moment, I realized he was wearing the same colored shirt that guy with the cap from earlier at the restaurant was wearing. Police got to the house and put him in cuffs. He would be charged with trespassing. And taking advantage of the moment, Nikki showed the officers all of the harassing and obsessive messages she'd been receiving from him. Since he was already being arrested, Nikki pressed charges for stalking and harassment, which the guy ultimately ended up paying a fine for and getting a misdemeanor. Nikki got an order of protection against him, and now if he ever contacts her again, he'll be arrested again. Ben was the ultimate creep. Thank God he's at least halfway smart enough to not have contacted her again, though. This happened 4 years ago. Valentine's Day was coming up. My boyfriend and I had planned a cute dinner like what most couples do. As we were walking into the restaurant, there's this couple outside, weirdly staring at my boyfriend and I. I slightly shove my boyfriend's arm as we get inside, and he gives out his name to be put in the wait line. The host said it would be a 45-minute wait, and she said she would text us when our table was ready. My boyfriend said let's go to the mini golf across the street, so we're walking back to his car. The lady from the couple stood up and held up her hand, introducing herself as Mrs. Gretty. I found it really weird and looked at my boyfriend. The lady still had her hand out. I wasn't trying to be rude, I gave her a shake. The lady went on to explain that her and her husband think we're a great-looking couple, and they're photographers and think we would make great photos, and to follow them to the studio, as she believes the wait time will be long. She goes on to say that she has no card on her, but their place was a 5-minute drive away and they could take us there as well. Red flags are going off, and my boyfriend politely declines and lets her know we have things to do. The look was still one of the most haunting looks ever, as she smiled and sat down next to the husband. As we get in the car, I tell my boyfriend how creepy that interaction was, and how the husband didn't even say a word. As we enter the mini golf place, we were pretty surprised to find it empty. We laughed the situation off, but in reality, I'm still creeped out. As this place is not really huge, you can see the front door on all the levels. So as we're on our 5th round, I hear the entrance bell ring. I turn to look, and my heart sinks. It's the same lady with her husband. She seems to look around, and then as we make eye contact, she gives me the creepiest smile. I let my boyfriend know, and he turns to look as they're getting their things. I tell my boyfriend I'm uncomfortable and we should just go wait in the car, as 15 minutes have passed already, so it wouldn't be much longer. He agrees, and we turn around, and they're right behind us, giving us the widest smiles. "Crazy how we both came to this spot," said Mrs. Gretty. This time the husband says, "We should face each other, Gretty versus Rod." My boyfriend's heart sank in that moment, as his last name is Rods. We politely declined, not wanting to know how they knew that information, and we said we have to go. Both of their smiles faded as we rushed out of there. I told my boyfriend we should just call it a night and go back to his place since it was closer than mine. Plus, my parents wouldn't be home until Sunday morning. He said we would go after dinner and not let some random weird couple ruin the night for us. We waited about 15 minutes in his car, talking about how weird the situation was, as he gets a text from the restaurant saying they're ready for us. We eat dinner, and he insists on paying today since it's Valentine's Day, as we usually split the bill. He goes to the bathroom, and as I'm waiting, I thought I saw that lady peeking out from around a corner. I convinced myself it was just in my head. My boyfriend gets out and is ready to go. Now, to get to his place, you have to take this long road surrounded by trees. As we start the drive, we notice a car following behind. I let my husband know, and we head into a CVS parking lot. I have to use the restroom, and since it was going to be a drive, we both get out and go. When we come out, we don't see that car that was potentially following us anywhere, so we make our way to his house. You know that road I talked about earlier being surrounded by trees? Well, while we're driving on it, we're like 3 to 5 minutes onto this road. We heard a loud pop, and my boyfriend stopped his car. His 2 front tires had popped. He put 2 and 2 together and ran to the car and said, "Get out, there's not much more time before they get here." He cut his engine and turned off the lights and locked the door. I was so scared and confused, not knowing what was going on. I told him we should wait in the car. He
He quickly got me and we ran into the woods. He told me to shush. We were hiding behind some trees and bushes. While we hid, he called the cops and quickly explained where we were at and what was happening. The operator asked to stay on the line and the cops would be here in a couple minutes. He said he couldn't stay on the line and hung up. As we stayed laying down, we heard a car engine coming up. My boyfriend said to lay flat as he did too. We heard the engine to the car stop, and we heard the familiar voice of Mrs. Gretty, if that was even her real name. She yelled, "Shit, we took too long." We heard a car door close, and then a car quickly speed away. We stayed down until the cops got there, which was about 2 minutes later. We explained the situation and got told we would be contacted if something came up. I called my sister to come pick us up, and he called the tow truck for his car. 4 years later, nothing has come up on it, and we never found out what they wanted or who they were. We're now married with a crazy story to tell our kids. During the fall 2018 semester, I was doing some online classes through a pretty prestigious college, but I knew that I would transfer to my hometown 4-year university for the winter semester. I still wanted to make some new friends though, so that I wouldn't feel alone, and maybe along the way it would be nice to meet someone to date, which is what happened. I met this girl through Tinder. She was really cool and we had a lot in common. Long story short, we started dating and we had a lot of fun together. She wasn't from my hometown, and I had noticed that after she came back from Thanksgiving break, the way she behaved and her attitude had changed. She was always on the more sarcastic side, but now it just seemed mean. For example, the playful, flirtatious teasing had become way more aggressive. There was no physical harm, I should say that. It was just the kind of teasing that shouldn't be happening in a relationship. I just brushed it off as stress due to finals approaching. She eventually went back home for winter break. We always found ways to stay in touch every day, such as text, Snap, and occasional FaceTime either once or twice a week. Once the winter semester started, I moved into an apartment because the dorms didn't seem that fun, and I had found something nice that was surprisingly cheap. Literally the night of the first day of classes, we decided to break up. Like I said, she was from a different state, and she was having a lot of trouble being away from home because she missed her family, friends, and pets a lot. Besides me and her roommate, who she didn't really get along with, she barely knew anybody in town. She was just such a shy person, and that's not a bad thing, but like I said, she didn't have a lot of friends to surround herself with, so she just wanted to be by herself all the time. So it was a nice exit out without having to be the one that did the dumping, because that kind of stuff just gives me too much stress and anxiety. A few weeks went by, and each day I felt a little less sad because when I looked back on the relationship, there were a bunch of issues that I had overlooked. It was the week leading up to Valentine's Day, and I was kind of sad because I had some fun things planned that I wanted to surprise my girlfriend with. I decided that maybe for that week, I would reactivate my Tinder account, really to see if I could get a match and possibly hang out with someone on the holidays so I wouldn't be alone because most of my friends had their own boyfriends and girlfriends. I did about 2 days before the holiday, and I got some matches after a few hours of having the app. I chatted with most of them and asked what their Valentine's Day plans were. And not to my surprise, they were all going out to bars. Personally, that lifestyle isn't really my thing, it just doesn't seem that fun to me. But I always use it as a last resort, and I wasn't that desperate. Yet. I eventually started texting with a girl named Alex, who wasn't into that stuff either. She would rather stay in and watch movies, which is what I would rather be doing too. She even had the same major as one of my best friends, and was taking some of the classes he was taking. But she didn't know if they had classes at the same time since they had just started and she was trying to figure out everyone's names. The best way to describe Alex is that she had shoulder-length blonde hair, cute glasses, freckles, and bright blue eyes. After texting for about an hour, I got her Snapchat and we moved the conversation there. I asked if she would want to hang out on Valentine's Day and she was down. So it was Valentine's Day 2018, which had fallen on the Thursday of the week. Luckily, I didn't have any Friday classes, and Alex said she would skip her Friday morning class so we wouldn't feel pressured to end the night so early. The first part of the night went pretty smooth. We got some McDonald's, saw a movie, and then walked around the downtown area for a while. To spare you the details, we eventually went back to my apartment and had sex, and to be honest, everything went great. She asked if she could spend the night because it was snowing out, and her place was about a 10-minute walk away. So of course I told her she could stay. We eventually fell asleep around 1 a.m. I'm a pretty light sleeper, especially when there's someone else in the bed with me. Around 3 a.m., Alex woke me up as she was getting out of the bed, but I didn't make her aware that she woke me up. It was pretty dark in the room, but I could see that she was walking towards the bathroom. She turned the light on and shut the door so that it wouldn't seep into the bedroom. I was very tired, so I just went back to sleep. I awoke again around 5:30 a.m., and to my surprise, Alex wasn't in the bed next to me. I turned to see if she was still in the bathroom, but I couldn't see the outline of the light, so that meant it was turned off. I wasn't in too much of a shock yet. I was just curious as to where she was. So I sat up and grabbed my phone off my bedside table. I didn't have any text from her saying that she had left, but I was able to see that the clothes she'd been wearing earlier were still on the ground next to mine. So she was still here somewhere. I then heard a creak come from the other side of the bedroom. I could see that Alex was just standing in the corner, back facing toward me. I was really freaked out. I quietly called out her name and asked if she was okay, but there was no response. I turned on the lamp I had on the bedside table. It didn't create too much light, but there was enough. I got out of bed and walked over to her. She was just standing there, not even moving. I was so creeped out, but I wanted to see what was going on. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder and said her name again, and there was no response. There were 10 seconds of silence, and right as I was about to say her name one more time, she turned around at an inhuman speed and started screaming like a maniac and hitting me. It wasn't the hardest of hitting, but I'm kind of a skinny guy, so it hurt a bit. The scariest part is there was no emotion on her face at all. I backed up and fell over onto my bed, and she followed me, still screaming and hitting me. After about 30 seconds of this happening, she ran over to her clothes, grabbed them, and ran out of my apartment. I got off the bed and ran to my front door, which was left wide open, and she was gone. I shut it and locked it. I then noticed there was a horrible smell coming from the bathroom. The door was shut, and when I opened it, the horrible stench came out. I turned on the light and found the room in a mess. The shower curtain was ripped off, my medicine bag had been thrown on the ground, and my floor was wet. The worst part was that she defecated and smeared it on the mirror. I called the police immediately, and they sent an officer to my place. They asked if they could see her Tinder and Snapchat profile, but of course, both had been deleted. I only had one picture of her that she sent on Snapchat, and I had screenshotted it because it was a cute-looking picture, but she was using a Snapchat filter in the picture. Sadly, there was not really much police could do except take a report and keep an eye open for her in the area. They advised me to have a friend sleep over later that night in case she would try to break in, which is what I did. I called one of my best friends, Rob. He was the one who had the same major as Alex. He came over later that night and I told him the whole story. One of the classes she said she was taking, that my friend was also taking as well, was a pretty small class that only met twice a week. I showed Rob the picture I had, and when I asked Rob if he knew her, he said he had never seen her in class. Rob and I watched a movie and fell asleep around 12 a.m. I awoke around 3 a.m. to find someone trying to open the front door from the other side. After letting it happen for about a minute, it then stopped. I walked over and looked out the peephole, but nobody was there. Nothing has happened since, but it still really freaks me out. I'm a single guy in my mid-30s. This happened a few years ago during a somewhat depressing period in my life. I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 5 years, the girl I thought I'd be marrying one day and starting a family with. It's safe to say I was pretty lost at that time. I can't lie, the psychological damage of the breakup was pretty severe. I spent entire weeks sulking and forgetting to take care of myself. I'd wake up, talk to no one, go to work, talk to no one, and come home to spend the rest of the day in bed. The weekends were even worse. I'd forget to eat, and I wouldn't leave the house. I'd binge watch movie after mind-numbing movie, not even realizing what I was watching half the time. But enough with the sob story. I'm much better now, although I still often think about the life I could have had if things went differently. Anyway, it was a Saturday night. I was slumped on the couch, barely moving except to hit play on another random movie. I couldn't even tell you what it was. Just another mindless action flick I'd forget about by the time it ended. For context, I was in my room, which is on the second floor of my house. I have a couch and a TV in my bedroom, so I typically never watch TV anywhere else but there. At one point, I looked down at my phone. It was a few minutes after 9 p.m. I remember that distinctly because my mom was calling me for like the 4th time that day. I didn't want to ignore her, but I let it ring out anyway. I knew she meant well, but I couldn't bring myself to talk. I didn't want to hear the usual questions about whether I'd eaten or gone outside. Eventually, I got tired of whatever was playing and backed out to the menu. I wasn't really in the mood for anything, but I clicked on some random horror movie I'd never heard of. It was one of those generic ones with a grainy thumbnail. I figured I'd half watch it until I fell asleep. About 20 minutes in, I realized the movie was even worse than I expected. The audio was a mess. Every time someone talked, I had to turn the volume way up just to catch a word or two. And then the next sound effect would blast through the speakers and damn near rupture my eardrums. For whatever reason though, I kept the movie on. I think it was just because I was too lazy to change it again. At some point, I started noticing this weird sound effect in the movie. It was this sharp, metallic clang, kind of like a pipe hitting concrete. It didn't match anything that was happening on the screen. No one was holding metal, and no one was in a warehouse or anything like that, and it wasn't timed with the scares either. It would just show up every minute or so, like the director had accidentally looped it or something. Same exact sound, same volume, and same pitch. It was almost too consistent to be a coherent sound design choice. That, plus the fact that the rest of the audio was mixed so poorly, made me question how the movie had even made it to streaming platforms. The poor quality of the movie actually made it harder to turn off, partly because I was enjoying criticizing it, but also partly because I needed to see how something so terrible would play out. About halfway through, I got up to use the bathroom, and for whatever reason, I actually paused the movie instead of not caring enough about what was going on. When I got back and sat down, I grabbed the remote and hovered over the play button, but right as I was about to press it, I heard that sound again. That same sharp metallic clang, except this time, the movie was paused. I froze for a second, just staring at the screen. No audio, no movement, but the sound had been clear as day, and it had come from somewhere inside the house. That's when it clicked. It had never been part of the movie. I stayed completely still, trying to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I watched the paused screen and just listened, hoping my mind had just been playing a trick on me. But then, about 45 seconds later, there it was again. The exact same clang. I didn't waste another second. I immediately jumped up, grabbed a knife from my desk, and started moving room to room, frantically checking every place someone could possibly be hiding. Every room in the house was clear though. There was no one. In fact, there were no signs that anything was out of place either. But as I walked back up the stairs with my heart still pounding, I heard the clang again. It wasn't as loud this time, meaning it must have been coming from my room, where I had been watching the movie. But I had been sitting there the whole time, so that didn't make any sense. That's when it hit me. I had a few windows open. It was spring, and the weather had finally started warming up, so I'd gotten into the habit of cracking them in the evenings to let some air in. I started thinking maybe the sound wasn't coming from inside the house at all. Maybe it had been coming from right outside the house this whole time. I don't know why, but that thought scared me even more. I went over to the window and pushed the curtain aside just enough to get a look at the backyard, and there it was. One of the deck chairs was sitting out in the middle of the lawn, maybe 20 feet from the house. And standing next to the chair was a kid, a young kid. I couldn't really make out any of his facial features given that it was so dark out, but the silhouette was way too small to be an adult. It was 100% a little kid. He was holding what looked like a PVC pipe, which explained the noise I had been hearing. He must have seen me, because as soon as I looked out the window, he smacked the pipe against the chair. I instantly stepped away from the window and felt my body start filling with fear. I know it sounds silly that I was afraid of something like that, but I couldn't fathom what that kid was doing outside my house. did he have some kind of mental disorder? It didn't make sense. And then I thought about the fact that he must have been standing out there for nearly an hour, which freaked me out even more. I tried to slow my breathing and think rationally. Maybe the kid was lost. Maybe he had wandered off from a nearby house and didn't know how to get back. I told myself I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. So I went down the stairs and made my way through the house toward the back door, trying to keep calm. I even turned on the porch light, thinking it might help the kid feel less spooked, or at least give me a better look at him. As I was turning the doorknob, I froze. Something about it felt wrong, like I was walking into some kind of trap. If that kid were really lost, wouldn't he ring my doorbell or call out to me through my window? And even if he were too scared to, and ultimately decided that banging a pipe against one of my chairs was the best option, would he really stick to that strategy after a whole hour? It was insane. Something in my gut told me not to go outside, so I slowly backed away from the door. I crept over to a small window just left of the door, one that overlooked the porch and part of the backyard. I kept the light off behind me and slowly tilted the blind with 2 fingers, just enough to see through without drawing attention, and there they were. There were 2 men wearing all black, crouching below my back door, as if ready to ambush me the second I opened it. I must have stared too long, because one of the men suddenly turned his head and locked eyes with me through the glass. I dropped the blinds and instantly dialed 911. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard banging on the back door. Those guys were trying to break in. I sprinted to my bathroom and locked the door. By that point, I was having a full-on panic attack. I felt like I couldn't move. I was struggling to breathe, honestly. Shortly after I got to the bathroom, I heard a crash from downstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps walking around below me. Those people were in my house. I heard a set of footsteps walking up the stairs, and I held my breath as they made their way down the hall. I saw the bathroom doorknob turn ever so slightly, followed by a loud bang, like they were trying to kick the door down. That made me lose it. I yelled at the top of my lungs that the police were on their way, and the person on the other side of the door instantly ran back down the stairs. A few seconds later, I heard one of the doors slam, then silence. The police arrived shortly after that, and I told them everything. There wasn't much they could do. I didn't have any cameras, and I wasn't even able to give them any valuable information. The one thing that made them take things a little more seriously was the fact that there was a child involved. According to the police, that kind of involvement suggested whoever these guys were, they weren't just impulsive criminals. They were willing to go way further, and that was the scariest part for me too. I don't like thinking about the poor kid's involvement in the whole thing. Every explanation I came up with is equally sickening. The police told me I was likely the target of a random attack, but the whole scheme was just way too elaborate, in my opinion. Nothing has happened since, though, and I've since moved on with my life. I just really hope that kid is somehow safe, even though I know the odds are slim. It's currently 2024 as I'm writing this. I'm a senior and I'm graduating in a couple weeks. Let me give you all a very brief rant. I never understood how most of my friends could survive a whole week-long spring break trip to Miami or some other party destination. I simply can't. So for every year of college, spring break was an excuse for me to just go home and relax. This past spring break was no different. I'd essentially be going off the grid for a week, taking a break from grueling schoolwork and mindless drama. I was actually really pissed because I had been working on a flawless regrade request for a midterm I had just taken, and my scummy TA denied it for no good reason. But anyway, it was a Monday morning. I didn't really have any plans, just needed to get a workout in, but that was about it. I've always been a morning workout guy. It's the one thing that makes me feel like I have my life together. So even though I was home for spring break and technically had nothing to do, I still set my alarm for 6 a.m. and forced myself out of bed. I figured if I got to the gym early enough, I could beat the rush. By 6:20, I was already dressed, out the door, and on the road. The drive to the gym takes about 15 minutes, mostly back roads through quiet residential neighborhoods. Nothing ever really happens out there. It was definitely a nice place to grow up in, but a little boring once I got older and all my childhood friends started moving on with their lives.
I was driving along listening to some YouTube beats when something strange caught my eye. There was an ice cream truck parked along the curb, just sitting there, engine off, no lights. That wouldn't have been weird in the summer, I guess, but this was mid-March. It was still kind of chilly out. All the kids were still in school too. There was no reason for an ice cream truck to be sitting there at 6:30 in the morning. It looked completely out of place. As I drove past the truck, I slowed down just enough to glance through the driver's window. It was empty. By the time I turned the corner and left it behind, I found myself thinking more about it than I should have. I don't know why. The sight just felt a little bizarre. It wasn't just that it was too early in the year for ice cream trucks. It was that I couldn't remember ever even seeing one in my neighborhood at all. Not even when I was a kid. My area just wasn't that kind of place. As weird as the whole thing was, I quickly dismissed it and proceeded with my workout. After the gym, I got a quick bite to eat and headed home, feeling like I'd actually done something with my morning. But as I turned onto the same street from earlier, the ice cream truck was still there, in the same exact spot. That made me pause. I figured someone would have called it in by now. This is the kind of neighborhood where people are really uptight and get twitchy if you park too long in front of their house. That actually reminds me of a time when some grumpy woman gave my friends and I crap for parking in front of her house, even though we were waiting for our other friend who lived right next door. I say that to say that I'm not crazy for expecting someone to have called the police about the truck. Curiosity got the better of me. Instead of heading straight home, I circled around the block to pass the truck again, just to see if someone was inside it now, and someone was. As I drove past the second time, I must have been a little too obvious with how slowly I was driving, because the guy in the front seat locked eyes with me for a few seconds. He looked really off. He had this long, almost cartoonishly pointed nose and a scraggly beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in years. He genuinely looked like someone who lived in his vehicle, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I drove straight home after that. My parents were both at work, so I had the place to myself. I spent the next few hours just killing time. Sometime in the afternoon, I walked down the driveway to check the mail. As I got to the end of the driveway, I glanced down the street and nearly died inside. It was that same ice cream truck from before. It was parked across the street, about 3 houses down. It wasn't facing me, but I had a feeling it wasn't just a coincidence. I didn't move for a second. I just stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had that guy really followed me home? I knew he had. There was no other explanation. I grabbed the mail and walked straight back inside, trying not to make it obvious that I'd seen anything. Once I was upstairs, though, I went to one of the guest bedrooms. There's a window that overlooks the street from a better angle, so I pulled the curtain aside and peeked through. Sure enough, the ice cream truck was still there. I watched it for a few minutes, but nothing happened. I'm not sure what I expected to see, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. Eventually, I had no choice. I didn't have all day to spend staring out a window, so I tried to get some stuff done on my laptop. I couldn't focus, though. Every half hour or so, I'd feel the urge to go back to the guest room and glance out the window. Every time I looked, the ice cream truck was still visible, but it was in a different spot, which meant the driver was intentionally moving around the street for whatever reason. I didn't know whether it was a good idea to call the police or not. I wasn't sure what I'd even say, given that nothing had actually happened. Even now, I wish that I had just done what any normal person would have done and either called the police or tried to ignore the truck, but I was too curious. My older brother is really into bird watching, so I started digging around his room for a set of binoculars I knew was in there somewhere. Eventually, I found them and returned to the guest room. I pulled the curtains aside and looked at the truck through the binoculars. I was not prepared for what I was about to see. Through the driver's side window, I could see that man from earlier, only he wasn't just sitting there. He was looking back at me with a pair of his own binoculars. As soon as he saw me looking, he instantly dropped the binoculars, started the truck, and drove off. I was horrified. That guy had been spying on me and my house for the better part of 3 hours after literally stalking me home. That's when I finally called the police. I didn't even know what I was expecting from it. I just didn't know what else to do. I told them that this ice cream truck had been circling my neighborhood all day, that I'd seen a man inside watching my house through binoculars, and that he drove off the second I looked back. The dispatcher was calm and told me they'd send someone to patrol the area and keep an eye out. She told me it should be relatively easy to spot an ice cream truck given how distinctive they were. Then she hung up. I didn't know what else to do after that. When my parents got home a little while later, I filled them in. They were obviously concerned, but they also told me it probably wasn't worth worrying about anymore. I was pretty tired by then, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime later, I woke randomly in the middle of the night. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone off my nightstand. It was sometime just after 3 a.m. I sat there in bed, trying to figure out what had woken me up, when I heard it. Music. It was very faint, almost too faint to notice at first. I kept listening, and panic started building inside me when I realized what kind of music it was. The jingle of an ice cream truck. Before I could do anything, something clicked softly against the glass of my bedroom window. I instantly connected the dots. Someone was throwing rocks at my window. That had to be what had woken me up. The music was way too quiet on its own. I sat frozen for a while, staring at the wall across from me. I kept telling myself to look, to just get up and check. But every time I started to move, my body locked up again. Eventually, I forced myself to do it. I crept toward the window and stood to the side of it for a second. On the count of 3, I peeled back the curtain in one fluid motion and looked. The man from earlier was standing in the middle of my front yard, right below my window, and on either side of him, holding his hands, were 2 small children, or at least they looked like children based on how short they were. I really couldn't tell on account of how dark it was. I didn't waste another second. I tried to ignore the pounding in my chest, stepped away from the window, and immediately went to wake up my dad. I had already dialed 911 by the time he went downstairs to have a look around. My dad's a pretty tough guy, so I figured he'd want to handle things himself. Unfortunately, that man had somehow slipped away in the few minutes it took us to get outside. The police arrived a while later. A few days went by and we never heard anything, and I eventually had to go back to school, but my parents promised me they'd be on high alert. That was almost a month ago, and luckily, my parents haven't told me about any strange occurrences since then. The reason I'm writing this now, though, is because my mom called me a few days ago. Apparently, there was a missing persons case that had just gone public in our hometown. 2 6-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, had vanished from a neighborhood about 30 minutes from where we lived. The moment she said it, my mind went straight back to that night, to those 2 small figures standing on either side of the man in my front yard. The whole thing honestly makes me sick. Why would that guy sit in my house for hours and throw rocks at my windows in the middle of the night? And why even go to those lengths if he was involved in something as serious as a kidnapping? Maybe he was worried that I had somehow caught on to what he was doing, but if he had really taken those kids, wouldn't attention be the last thing he'd want? And then there's the kids themselves. I wonder if they were already with him when I first saw the truck that morning, or were they somewhere else? I really can't stop thinking about it. The only explanation I can come up with is the type of person who'd kidnap a child doesn't think like normal people do, which is why that man would risk getting caught just to freak me out. My mom followed up with the police to try and shed some light on the case and our possible connection to it. If anything ever happens, I will send an update. This happened last spring, about 9 months ago. I'm a sales associate for BMW, so my weeks are pretty busy. When I'm not at the dealership, I'm answering my phone. Because of all the phone work involved, sometimes I feel like I have more to do when I'm not at the dealership, as funny as that sounds. Because of the nature of my work, I pretty much have to answer my phone every time it rings, especially when it's an unknown caller. So, as you'd expect, I get a lot of scam calls, but I have no choice but to answer, just in case it's a client or an interested party. One night, sometime after 10 p.m., my phone started ringing. It was a number my phone didn't recognize. Normally, I would have picked up without thinking, but this time I was already in bed halfway through winding down. Something about how late it was just made me let it ring out. They didn't leave a voicemail. I figured if it was important, they'd leave one. But a few minutes later, the same number called again. I sat up and answered it. I was a little irritated, but I still tried to keep my voice polite, just in case it was someone serious. At first, all I heard was static, just this thick, uneven fuzz. I was about to hang up when I caught something underneath it. A voice. I held the phone closer and listened. It was my voice. I was 100% sure of it. That actually made me freeze up a little bit. After a few seconds, I realized it was more than just a recording of my voice. It was a conversation I'd had earlier that day with a client. Just standard stuff, pricing, availability, setting up a test drive. Nothing sensitive, but it was definitely real. It was definitely my voice. I still don't know if it was the right decision, but I instantly hung up the phone. I sat there for a while, just staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. I wasn't panicking, but I definitely wasn't calm either. The best way I can describe what I was feeling was a mix of confusion and unease. My first thought was that maybe it was the client I had talked to earlier. Maybe he had accidentally called me while trying to play back the call or record it for his own notes. I really don't know. It felt like a stretch, but it was the only explanation that didn't immediately spiral into something worse. That didn't really explain why the number was unknown instead of the number he had called from earlier, but it was the best I could come up with. The next morning, I decided to call him back just for my own sanity. He answered right away and seemed totally normal, friendly even. But when I brought up the call from the night before, he had no idea what I was talking about. He sounded genuinely confused. I apologized for the mix-up and hung up, and for whatever reason, I believed him. The rest of the day was normal. I had a few appointments, followed up with some leads, nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't think too much about the call from the night before, but later that night, around the same time, I got another call. The number wasn't saved in my phone again, but it was different from the number that had called me the night before. This time, I answered it immediately. Exactly what I was dreading happened. It was another static-heavy recording of a conversation I had that day with a client. A different client. A whole different conversation entirely. I hung up again without saying anything. That night was when it really started getting to me, because now it felt intentional, and I noticed something else. The recording didn't include the client's voice. It was only me talking, like a one-sided call. I started wondering if someone had been listening in on my conversations and recording me somehow. I didn't sleep very well that night, as I couldn't stop thinking about it, but I didn't know what to do. I never thought I was a paranoid person, but the next week of my life proved me wrong. Every night for a week, the same thing would happen. I'd get a call from a random number and would listen to a staticky recording of a conversation I'd had that day. I started recording the calls myself. I can't even tell you why. I just thought it was the smart thing to do. By the third or fourth night, it started to wear on me. Not just in a creepy, this is weird kind of way. I mean, it started to actually mess with my head. I couldn't relax, I couldn't think. I'd catch myself looking out the window every few minutes, like someone might be standing out there watching me. I started triple locking my front door. Then I started leaving a light on in every room at night. At one point, I even moved a chair in front of my bedroom door. Looking back, it's really hard for me to explain any of these decisions, but my mind was in a very different place during that period. Anytime my phone rang, even during the day, I'd step outside and answer it from the safety of my car, where I could see every angle around me. It sounds crazy now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At one point, I even brought it up with the police. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I figured if someone was monitoring me, I had to at least make some kind of report. The officer I spoke to was polite enough, but I could tell right away they didn't take it seriously. He said they could try looking into the numbers, but unless there was a direct threat or evidence of harassment, there wasn't much they could do. I don't know if they actually tried to trace the calls or just filed it away and forgot about it. Either way, it didn't help. If anything, it made me feel more alone in it. A few days later, though, the calls suddenly stopped.
That week of obsessively checking my surroundings and answering calls from my car must have deterred whoever was harassing me. Part of me wanted to believe it was over, but I couldn't relax. If anything, the sudden absence of contact actually caused me to spiral even further into paranoia. My mom is schizophrenic, so I always figured I was predisposed to developing some kind of mental condition, but it was literally happening right before my very eyes. I was becoming one of those reclusive people who think the entire world is spying on them. I ended up getting a brand new personal phone number. It was a massive headache. Switching numbers meant having to reestablish contact with clients, update everything linked to my phone, and risk missing out on people trying to get in touch with me. But I did it anyway. I couldn't shake the feeling that my old number had been compromised somehow. After a few more days of radio silence, the thing I was dreading happened. One night after work, I got another call. It was exactly like the ones before it. I kept my cool, and instead of remaining silent and hanging up, I actually spoke. I said something along the lines of, "I don't know who you are or why you're doing this, but if it's money you want, I've got it." I went on to say that I'd happily pay to be left alone. I gave the person my address and said I'd be willing to meet. And then, for the first time, there was an actual voice on the other end. It sounded like they were using a voice changer. And all they said was, 11 o'clock, before hanging up. I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would I volunteer my address like that? Honestly, I can't answer that question. I was acting irrationally, I know that. But it's impossible for me to explain exactly how my mind was working during that time, so I'm not even gonna bother. The next 4 days were the most traumatic and stressful moments of my life. I'm not sure how much I can even type out without getting too graphic, but here goes. I have a handgun in my house for personal safety. I grabbed it from my room, loaded it, and sat at my kitchen table and waited. I can't even begin to explain all the thoughts that were bouncing around in my head as I sat there. I contemplated a lot of things in those 4 hours. I'd go as far as to say that had it not been for sheer chance, I might not be typing this out right now. Just thinking about that night gives me a sickening feeling. 11 p.m. came and went, and no one showed up. There's no telling what I would have done had they actually showed up. I ended up sleeping at the kitchen table with the gun in my hand. It was by far the worst night of my life, but thankfully, that was the end of it. I never got another mysterious call again, but that didn't change the fact that that person had done irreparable damage to my mental state. It took me a lot of therapy and time off work to recover fully, and I still get chills thinking about how easily I was almost driven to complete madness. I will never have an explanation for what happened to me. I have no idea how that person recorded my conversations or who they even were. I have no idea why they harassed me or why they stopped for that matter. I've since moved out of that house, but there's not much I can do beyond that. If anything, this experience has made me a lot more fearful of the future. I can't help but think that I'm destined to end up just like my mom. Hopefully getting this out there will help me heal in some way.
What I'm about to show you in this video are 3 different sets of texts that become much scarier when you hear the background stories behind them. In this first one, these are texts between a young girl named Emily and her mom. Emily sent me screenshots of these texts along with the background story to go with them. First, to read the texts. Emily says to her mom, "Are you home?" "No, still with your dad, what's up?" "I heard someone come in." "The house? Is Peter home?" "I don't know, I've been in my room." "I don't think so, because he was supposed to work till 12 tonight." "Are you sure you heard the door open then?" "Mom, there's someone in the house." "What? Who is it?" "Mom, I don't know, there's some man walking around downstairs. I'm scared, what do I do?" "Emily, find somewhere to hide right now, I'm calling the police. Lock your door right now and hide somewhere in your room, okay?" "Okay, I'm in the closet." "Okay, good, sweetie, I'm on the phone with the police, don't make any noise at all. Stay in the closet until you hear the police come inside the house." "Do you still hear them?" "Mom, he's trying to open the door." "Emily, please just be quiet, you're gonna be okay, the police are almost there." "Emily, the police are there, are you okay?" This was where the texts ended. This was what was going on that night when Emily sent these texts to her mom. She was home alone while her mother was out to dinner with her dad, and her older brother Peter was working late. Nobody was expected to be home except for her at this time, so when she heard the front door closing downstairs, she was immediately alarmed and concerned. She texted her mother asking if she and her dad possibly returned home early, to which her mother shot that down, saying she was still with her father. On the side, sometime between her mom asking Emily if she was sure she heard the front door open and her follow-up question mark, Emily texted her brother Peter as well asking if he was home, and he replied he was still at work. At this point, Emily peeked out her bedroom door down the stairs and saw, in her words, a 30-something-year-old tall man in a hoodie, beanie, and black sweatpants walking around her living room. At this point, she started to freak out and locked her bedroom door as quiet as she could and continued to text her mom. Upon telling her mom some stranger was in the house, the mom suggested Emily hide in the closet while she got on the phone with the police. While sitting in her bedroom closet trying to wait this nightmare out, Emily heard the man fiddling with the doorknob to her bedroom trying to open the door, followed with him trying to forcefully break the door open by the sound of it. This was where Emily stopped replying to her mother, as she was too scared to even move a muscle in fear of being heard, even after the man gave up on the door. Police arrived and entered through the front door, which was unlocked, and they knew to go straight to Emily's closet. It was only then, when the police opened the closet door, that she felt safe to move. The intruder had stolen a number of valuables, but Emily was fortunate enough to have made it through this unharmed. She called her mother while the police were there to let her know she was okay, and the parents returned home shortly thereafter. This is a perfect example of why you should always make sure all the entrances to your house are locked, especially at night or when you're home alone. In this next one, the following texts are between a girl who wishes to remain anonymous, who I'll just refer to as Amanda, a guy named Jake who she met a handful of times through friends, and separate texts among Amanda and her friend Alyssa. It starts with Jake texting Amanda, "Hey," and this is how it goes. "Hey, what are you doing?" "Nothing, what about you?" "Same, want to hang out." "Maybe, what do you want to do?" "I mean, we can't hang here because my parents are home, but what if I came to you? Are your parents home?" "Nope." "So let me come, lol." "When?" "I'm free now if that works for you." "What made you even think to hit me up?" "You're really pretty and I just want to hang out with you." "Okay, I look like a potato right now, so you have to give me some time to get ready." "That's fine, what's your address?" "Word, I'll head over soon." "Wait, no, don't, I need time to get ready." The text between Amanda and Jake left off there, where he apparently left her text unread when she asked him not to come over just yet. At the same time, she went to go text her friend Alyssa about it, as Alyssa's part of the same friend circle as the two of them. Amanda was surprised to be hearing from Jake and texts Alyssa to see her reaction about it. This is how those texts went. "OMG, he randomly hit me up, and he wants to come over. Are you gonna let him?" "I told him yeah, but to let me get ready. He said he's gonna head over soon." "I told him wait, but he left me on scene." "Wait, hang on. I feel like it's weird that he's texting you. I'm gonna call him." "Why? Don't mention me." "I won't, but he's not picking up FaceTime anyway." "I'm calling Jamie. This is weird." "Why is it so weird?" "Because I know he wouldn't just text you like that." Immediately, Alyssa finds it surprising and odd that Jake would text Alyssa, for the sole reason that Jake was apparently on the verge of officially dating someone else. When Alyssa tries to call Jake multiple times but fails, she then resorts to calling Jake's sister Jamie, who was also part of the same friend group. All the while, Amanda is confused as to why Alyssa finds this all so weird. Alyssa's last text to Amanda was OMFG, before calling her, revealing that Jamie told her over FaceTime that Jake lost his phone the day before, and his Find My iPhone was disabled. They obviously quickly draw the conclusion that whoever was texting Amanda was not Jake. Jake then got on the phone with Amanda and told her that whoever had his phone was nobody that he knew, because he lost his phone during his morning run. The three didn't know whether it was just a prank or not, until Amanda got a follow-up text from the person who had Jake's phone, saying, "I'm here, I'm at the door." Given that the whole reason this person came over was because Amanda said her parents weren't home, meant whoever was on the other side of the door likely meant her harm, and they were aware she was a defenseless girl home alone. Amanda looked through the peephole of her front door, and there was someone in a hood standing on her front porch, looking at the peephole. Amanda sent one final text saying this: "I know this phone was stolen, I called the cops already, they're almost here. You better get out of here and never come back or you'll be sorry. We also have you on video camera, so wave hello." The person read the text right away and didn't respond. The next time she checked through the peephole, the person was gone. Jake was able to get his IMEI number, and since it was being used for illegal activity, police helped track the phone to a man who lived a town over, who was prosecuted accordingly, and in this case, justice was actually served. In this last one, these were the texts received by single mother Marissa Rivera. Marissa was awoken by her phone vibrating on her nightstand at 1 a.m. on a Friday night. On the screen were a bunch of texts from her son John. The text went as follows: "Mom, I need help. I got into a car accident. Can you come pick me up? I think I injured my elbow. The damage is pretty bad. I don't know what to do. Please tell me you're joking. Are you okay? Yes, my elbow just hurts. Where are you? At the intersection of Robeson Street and Humphrey Lane by Longley Supply. Is Kevin with you? No, I'm alone. Okay, just stay there. I'm coming." Marissa started to get ready to go to her son's aid when she remembered he had location sharing on with her. So, wanting to make sure he gave the right location, she checked where her son's iPhone was located. She was taken aback when she saw John's location was at the house, not at this random intersection. She went to John's room, but he wasn't in his bed. So she went and called her other son Kevin, who was also still out. Kevin picked up his phone, sounding intoxicated, according to Marissa. And when asked if Kevin was with John, he said yes, and John said "Hi, Mom" into the phone, less drunk sounding than Kevin. The two were together and claimed there was no car accident and that John lost his phone. Marissa came to the horrible realization that if her kids were telling the truth, somebody else was in the house with her using John's phone. Marissa left the house with her cell phone and called the police while hiding in her car, reporting a breaking and entering. When police showed up and searched the house, nobody was there. On top of that, John's phone location was updated to down the block, but that was the last known location before it was either turned off or broken. The office window of the house was the most likely entry and exit point since, according to Marissa, it's easily liftable and big enough for most people to fit through. Marissa was having the conversation with her sons while standing in the middle of the house, loud enough for whoever was in the house with her to hear her realization that the car accident never happened, and heard her rushing out of the house. What most likely happened here was somebody who knew John either stole or found his phone, broke into the house through the window, and tried tricking their mom into leaving the house so that they could rob the place while nobody was home. Thankfully, she called her other son and was able to realize it was some kind of setup, and she was able to get the police to the house. The family was never able to find out who was the one who sent the text on John's phone. Perhaps another story illustrating the importance of having a passcode on your phone to prevent a stranger or anybody else from having complete access to it.